It's Thursday, and y'all know what that means. It is time to talk about Notre Dame Clemson, keys to victory. The Fighting Irish have a big game this weekend, Ryan. They take on the fourth-ranked Clemson Tigers. We've talked a lot this week about the opportunity that is in front of Notre Dame. You've got the number 4 team in the country, tons of recruits coming in. It's going to be a nationally televised game, obviously. It's going to be a night game, and it's an opportunity to really put a lot of the stink of a couple of the losses Notre Dame has, sort of behind you. It doesn't erase them, but it puts that stuff behind you and really puts Notre Dame in a position to finish this year incredibly strong. And there's a lot of recruiting implications, present and future, in this game. This is the kind of game Marcus Freeman talked about it today, Ryan, and he talked about it again on Monday, and he's nailed it. This is the kind of game, as a recruit, as a player, you come to Notre Dame for. It's these heavyweight matchups against a top-ranked team. Man, it doesn't get any better than this, Ryan. It really doesn't.
Now, I mean, if I could start with the recruiting side of things, Brian, Sean Stiers texted me this morning and was like, do you know how many recruits are going to be on campus? And I actually tallied it up, man. I'm like, there's 60 plus that are going to be on campus this weekend for Notre Dame. It's Clemson. And that is a mass. I mean, recruits and commits alike have been talking about this game for Notre Dame for months, man. Like, I remember in the preseason talking to like Sam Pendleton about, when he's going to make it up to Notre Dame during the season. And he talked about the Clemson game. He's like, everyone's going to be at the Clemson game, right? So this is a national game, obviously. If you're a Notre Dame fan or you're a national media member or you're just a general fan, you're going to watch this football game Saturday night at 7:30 against what has been, even though Clemson's taken a small step back over the last couple of years, this is still one of the premier programs in college football over the last 10 years. Like, they have been tremendous, obviously, right? So Notre Dame gets an opportunity on a national stage at home to show the progress that they have made. That's this game for me, right? Like, where is this program going? I think that this is going to be a pretty awesome indicator for what success could happen. And you have a perfect situation, I think. You haven't played well at home, but you have a chance to flip the scripts. You have a chance to impress in front of recruits, fans. I just saw earlier that the game's already sold out, like as it should be, right? So should be a great crowd, should be a lot of recruits. And for the players that are going to be playing this football game and the coaches that are coaching, this is, to your point, this is why you come to Notre Dame, man. Like, this game, the USC game, Ohio State to start the year, this is the game that you come for. And this is where you need to get back to prominence, to play a game like this and to win this type of football game, obviously.
Ryan, I think the one thing about this game, and we'll kind of get into our predictions tomorrow, but I don't think this is a game where Notre Dame has to play out of their minds. And we'll get into this in the keys of the game. There are areas where Clemson has an advantage over Notre Dame. No question.
Yep.
But there are also more areas than we've ever seen that Notre Dame has areas where if they play their game, they have advantages over Clemson. And that's really ultimately, you talk about keys to the victory. We'll get into some specifics of what they need to do. But, this is one of those games where Notre Dame just has to be themselves. It just be the best version of themselves that we have already seen. They don't have to play out of their minds. They don't have to play perfect. And I think that's a really important thing that Coach Freeman hit on to them this week, and why he said hey, we're Notre Dame comment is, guys, you don't need to put the pressure on yourselves of everything has to go exactly right or we can't win, which, was kind of close to being accurate in 2018. Not as much in 2020, but definitely 2018. And so you look at this game, and as we said, this is a really good Clemson team, but this is not 2018 Clemson. This isn't 2015 Clemson. It's a team that, and Notre Dame's not those teams either. Notre Dame's got some areas where they're better than they were then, some areas where maybe they're not as good as they were then, but the matchup is better for Notre Dame. And I think that's a big key that people have to understand is Clemson is certainly capable of coming in here and kicking Notre Dame's butt. There's no question. And if Notre Dame plays like they have in half the games they've had this season, that's going to happen. If they play the way they did against Marshall and UNLV and Stanford, then probably get their butts kicked, right? Cal, probably get their, at least the first half. But if they play the way they did against North Carolina, the way they did against BYU to a degree, the way that they did last week against Syracuse, and to a degree of how they played defensively against Ohio State, then there's no doubt that Notre Dame can win this game. And I think that's the thing that's a little different this time than what we've seen in the past is this is definitely a Notre Dame team. I think the last Notre Dame team that I saw that matched up this well against Clemson was the 2015 team. And it's not so much that this is the best team since then. It's just the individual matchups and the unit matchups of this game are places where I think, because like we talk a lot about, I'm really worried about the fact that, Notre Dame's strength is their offensive line, but that's Clemson's strength too. Well, the same is true if you're looking at it from a Clemson standpoint. Man, like the key to our defense has been our D line and our ability to shut down the run. But man, this is the best offensive line we faced so far this year by a mile. Those things are true on both sides of the ball. And so I think that's the difference between this matchup and some past matchups. And that's why it is important that the words that we've talked about so much this year, play with fire, be mentally ready. But the biggest thing is have a good plan and execute.
Yep.
I'm more confident in the second than I am the first, at least offensively. Sure. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Well, and Brian, I was going to say that for this game, people aren't going to want to admit this on a national perspective, but these teams are more similar than they are different this year, in my opinion, right? Like there's a lot of the same strengths. There's a lot of the same weaknesses. There's a lot of same growth that needs to happen on both sides of the football, if we're being honest. I mean, you talk about the quarterback position as one that's like very, very eerily similar right now with how that position's playing, what their success is built on, running the football and stopping the run. Like there's a lot of similarities between these teams. I would say this too, and it goes off of your point, right? Notre Dame, and we've talked about some schematic changes that we have wanted, or emphasis changes, I should say, right? The ability to diversify the run game and have a higher emphasis on this player and that player and so on and so forth. But I think for me, one thing that I want to stress to this team this week is what you're good at, right? And there's things that you can do to work off of what you're good at for sure. But don't try to be something you're not this week. That's right. Not what this week is for, right? Be true to what you are and expand upon it. That's the biggest thing. Like some people will look at this game, big matchup, Saturday night, prime time, all that stuff, and they'll say that for Notre Dame, this is the game to pull out all the stops, throw out the kitchen sink. And I'm just like, I don't think that's true. Like you need to expand upon what makes you successful.
Your strengths. That's the key, Ryan. Complement your strengths. Not like you said. I think Ryan, that part right there, hammer on that. I want you to hammer on that because you do not have to gimmick your way into success against Clemson this year.
Because I think that when you're going to hear this breakdown, especially today with the areas that we see as strengths for Notre Dame and potential problem areas, and then vice versa on Clemson's side of things, this is not a perfect Clemson team, right? Like you don't have to have the perfect game plan to win. These teams are more similar than I think people want to admit. And I think that there's going to be some cases, and there's going to be a lot of cases, where Notre Dame's dudes can be better than Clemson's dudes that are facing off against them. And it also can go vice versa. So I think that this game really does fix to be a dogfight. And I'm not saying that's a dogfight as in like it's going to be 17-13, although would it shock me if it was? Like, not necessarily. But I just think for me, Notre Dame has more strengths than people want to really let on in this game. And Clemson is not a perfect team. This is a team that will make mistakes. It's about Notre Dame capitalizing on those mistakes and being better in some key areas. That's for me.
You got quarterback issues.
Mm-hmm.
You got receivers that were four-star recruits but aren't living up to their expectations. A lot of production at tight end. A running game that you're trying to build around but it's a little inconsistent. You got two position groups on defense that are really good, but a third that's a little spotty. Does that sound like a lot like Notre Dame? Does that also sound exactly like Clemson? I mean,
that's what I'm saying, man.
Right?
There's some comparisons. There's some parallels in this football game. Like there's a lot actually, which is pretty interesting to kind of look at.
Well, Ryan, with that being said, let's jump into our keys to victory. And we're going to start with the Notre Dame offense. And if you don't know what my number one key is right now, then you're either new to the channel or you haven't been paying attention. Ryan, key numero uno, start fast. And it's always different every week, right? But there's one key ingredient to this week that we'll start with first, and that is you need confidence on offense. Drew Pine especially. Tommy Rees's entire early game plan needs to be about how can I get Drew into some successful situations early. And it's not always about easy throws, or, get him on the perimeter. I mean, there's a part of that. There's something to that, some of those easy throws, but we saw him miss a pretty easy early throw on third down. It's whatever he's comfortable with. Like, here's how my script would have been put together for Friday or Thursday and Friday. Whatever Drew was money on in Tuesday and Wednesday in practice. I don't care if you think it's a great play or not. If Drew was money on something in practice on the times that you repped, and hopefully you repped your plays enough to where you feel comfortable that he hit something time and time again. And if not, then that's a problem that you need to address. But it's a thing where if his mind is like, man, I had a lot of success with this in the week of practice, then he's going to go into those throws early with confidence in those throws, right? So that's part of it. And that can include taking some shots, which we'll get into. It's imperative that Drew get comfortable early. That's a key to starting fast. You've got to get the crowd into it early. I mean, that's a big key because you want the crowd loud. And I think you need to put Clemson on their heels. I think that's a big thing, is if this Clemson defense can just pin their ears back and go, then you can have some success. You can have some success, or they will have a lot of success against you. If you can get them on their heels and find ways to attack their pressures, find ways to get the run game going, find ways to hit a couple shots down the field, get them on their heels. Those are areas where you could start having some success. But the biggest thing is, on all the other things, you'll get early points, give your defense a reprieve, which is another part. Protect your defense by getting some early scores, give them time to get up to speed of what Clemson's doing. But the biggest thing for me is just the Drew Pine aspect. If they can get Drew comfortable and confident early, they're going to have a chance to have success offensively. He is ultimately the one key above all others in this game. Is if Drew can just play good football, it doesn't need to be Hercules. Just play good football. The shots that are there, take them and hit them. The easy stuff that is there, take it and hit it. Hit those easy throws. Hit the open guys. Guys will be open, right? If he can just play good football, then Notre Dame's going to be able to move the ball and score in Clemson, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, you said it perfectly to begin it, right? The defensive line, and we've talked about this a ton already this week with the Miles Murphys of the world, the Brian Bresee, Xavier Thomas, KJ Henry, Tyler Davis, like – those guys are attack type players, right? Like they want to pin his ear back. They want to get after the passer. And I mean, I feel like we always talk about what are ways around that, right? Like we talk about the screen game and running at them and slowing them down that way. You know what's another way to stop a lethal pass rush and an attack style defense? Is to punch them in the mouth and get up early, and to be in that situation where they are now guessing what you have to do. When you are a one-dimensional football team against that type of units, that's when they feast. And I think at early starts, the ability to throw the football and come out strong and get a couple scores relatively early in this game, that exudes confidence not only for your team, but I think it puts the Clemson defense into the worst possible situation that they can be in, right? Because I think the perfect situation is that Notre Dame's able to run the football. They're able to stay balanced. They're able to have success. So if you get in that early rhythm, this Clemson defense is going to I'm interested to see how they respond, Brian, because like even a overarching kind of encapsulation of this program is that they're used to winning, right? And for the most part, they're front runners, right? Like they're winning, and they're winning pretty convincingly in football games, where they're taking early leads and they're kind of just finishing games out. If you come out and you start fast and you shock this team a little bit, you put them backs against the wall, I'm not saying that they'll collapse, but I am interested to see how they do respond in those situations, because it's something that they're not incredibly used to. It's kind of foreign territory for them.
I think you saw this in the second half of the Wake Forest game. Once Wake Forest offense got going, there wasn't a whole lot Clemson could do. They were able to regroup in overtime, which was good. But they just couldn't, because they have, like you said, they haven't been put in that situation a lot this year, where they've really been threatened the way that Notre Dame can threaten them. Of course, Notre Dame's got to still go play and prove themselves, but that's going to be a key. So starting fast is going to be number one. Number two, and this is going to be sort of big picture, we'll get into specifics next, is this is kind of obvious, but also too important to not be a key. And that is, they've got to have a dominant performance from the line. Now, a dominant performance from the line isn't that you dominate your opponent. I don't know if Notre Dame's capable of dominating Clemson. A dominant performance against a dominant defense means you're doing your job, you're getting a push, you're executing at a high level, you're playing with good technique, and when the opportunities are there and you catch them in a play, you catch them in a slant the wrong way, you catch them in a twist, you catch them in a linebacker fire, you got to get a body on him, because if you can knock that guy out and let that running back get past you, there's room to run. And I think that's going to be a key. And then the other part of being where they do need to dominate Clemson as much as they can is in pass pro. They've got to give Drew Pine some time to throw. Now, what I would do in this game and what I would do if I was Notre Dame, the one thing that I would do differently is they have to do more of getting Drew drops on downfield stuff in the shotgun. He's kind of catching that snap and not really getting depth, which is why the pressure gets to him a little bit sooner, or it may seem like it's getting that there sooner. If he's going to be attacking down the field, they need to do a little bit more of a big drop at the beginning to get him some room, which means you've got to, keep things a little bit wider. But I think that's going to be a key in this game is the offensive line has to play at its top level, and it's across the board. And I like the perimeter matchup. I think Notre Dame can hang there. The question is going to be, can they contain the inside group of Tyler Davis, Brian Bursey, and Ook Aroro. So that's going to be a big key is, look, they're going to have their plays, but for the most part, you got to keep them in check and just hammer away, chip away, because eventually you're going to get that one play where you do catch them. And that's where you've got to be able to make some plays.
It's a great note because you can't expect Joe Alt to win every rep against Miles Murphy, right? Like, there's a reason that Miles Murphy is going to be a top 10 to 15 draft pick this year come April, right? Like, he's that type of player. But I think that the interesting part, Brian, is that the offensive line has been playing really well for Notre Dame. We know what Clemson has. We've talked about it in nauseum already this week. But for Notre Dame to make that next step as an offensive line and to have this type of football, to have a victory in this type of football game, you have to have Joe Alt play better than a guy like a Miles Murphy, right? Like, he needs to have more wins than he has losses in this football game. You need to have Blake Fisher have another good football game, keep building off of what he's done the last couple of weeks. And a player that we don't talk about too much because he's just kind of been doing his job and getting things done the last few weeks, Jared Patterson is really starting to settle into that left guard position and playing good football. Zeke Correll's taken a step forward. He's been good. Josh Lugg maybe just played one of his better football games last week that he's played probably in his career, if just kind of in a vacuum. So the fact that your interior is playing better, you need to match physicality and you need to be up for the challenge, man. Like, that's one of the biggest things is, yes, are you going to lose some reps against Brian Bursey? Of course you are. There's no doubt. I mean, the kid's extremely talented. Are you going to lose some reps against Miles Murphy? Absolutely. Are you going to lose reps against Tyler Davis at times? Yes. But the key is that you need to leave this football game and say, my offensive line was better than Clemson's vaunted defensive line today.
Yes.
Like, that is the point blank. Domination, to your point, not realistic, right? Like, dominating the football team is going to look – this football team is going to look a lot different than it is against Syracuse, for instance.
Correct.
But they need to – your dudes – we were talking about Joe Alt, maybe an All-American this year. He's playing that well. Well,
he's going to be an All-American. The question is, will he be a first team or a second team or, that kind of thing, third team, right?
And that difference is this game, right? Like, against the Miles Murphy, where everyone's watching, all the voters are watching this football game and to see how he reacts to playing against one of the best defensive ends in college football. Your dudes on the offensive line that have seen a huge improvement over the year, you need them to be more of dudes on Saturday than what Clemson has defensively. That is the point blank to it. I think that's ultimately, we talked about that's getting it early rhythm and starting fast is maybe the number one key. This one might be actually my number one key, Brian, because it's just something where your strength needs to be better than their strength at the end of the day. And offensively, if you do that, there's going to be opportunities. At that point, your playmakers have to capitalize. That's the end of it.
I wouldn't say it's more important. I think it's a different key. And this is why I always go with start fast first, because start fast is sort of an overarching, encompasses all of it, right? Well, you can't start fast if your offensive line doesn't come out playing well early, right? That's kind of where I'm coming from. And that's what happened in 2020. If you go back and you remember that game, Notre Dame did two things really well. They took shots down the field and they got Kyron Williams going on a couple big runs. Well, the reason they were able to get Javon McKinley open down the field in 2020 was because Ian Book was getting time to throw. And the reason that Kyron was getting free is because they ran those counter plays and they blocked dudes up and they got Kyron in space and bam, right? He was able to rip off a big run. So it was the strong – I mean, that was arguably the best performance that offensive line had all year. And that was a pretty good offensive line in 2020. And that was probably the best game they played all year. And that, again, that was a lot of these same dudes that Clemson has now, but now they're older, right? Mm-hmm. And you didn't have Tyler Davis didn't play in that game, as we've talked a lot about. But, this is an opportunity for Notre Dame offensive line to truly have a statement game. They've played very well the last month, very well. But it's been against teams that you're like, okay, well, they're playing better, but, it's against North Carolina and BYU and, Stanford. The offensive line actually played very well against Stanford. The rest of the unit didn't. You look at UNLV, you look at Syracuse. Those are games you expect the Notre Dame offensive line to play well. And I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but your dudes are definitely better than their dudes. This is a game that's a little bit more evenly matched. This is the game where you truly find out just how good you are or are not. Can you beat up on the little guy, or can you step up with someone that's as big as you are, as bad as you are, and say, yeah, but you're not me, and you're not at Notre Dame, and this is who we are. So that's going to be a big part of this. And then a third key kind of ties into the play of the offensive line is, as a coaching staff, you have to help your offensive line. And I don't think Notre Dame – they can't think that they can just go into this game and run duo and counter the whole game. They can't possibly think that. And I know that they've thought that for the last month, but that can't be the key. And part of me, I found myself in the last 48 hours kind of getting into fan mode. And what I mean by that is you get in that as a fan, like, you know what? He wasn't showing this the last two games because he was saving it for Clemson. Like, you almost have to convince yourself of that, Ryan, because you just look at this team and you say, there's no way they can possibly think that they can go play Clemson and just run duo and counter, right? They've got to be saving some stuff. They've got to be saving a buck sweep or a toss or something for this game. Moral of the story is they're going to have to mix up their run game. That doesn't mean you don't need to run 35 outside zone plays, but you have to be able to do things. And what does it mixing up the run game mean? Number one, you've got to be able to get some of your runs established out of 11 personnel. I know 12 and 13 has worked for you, but against Clemson, you'll have some 12 and 13 opportunities, no doubt. I'm not scrapping 12 and 13, but there's some 21 and 11 personnel stuff that you've got to figure out a way to get going with the run game. Spread Clemson out, get Barrett Carter out of the box as much as possible, and try to find some opportunities. Because I think if they can have success running sort of where Jeremiah Trotter's the primary guy, that's where I think they can have some success. That's a guy that is going to be a key. And part of putting together a good game plan is, and we'll get to this in number 4, is you got to find some ways where this is a guy we can go after, right? Mm-hmm. And that was one of the first things, like good coaching staffs that I was on, heck, even one of the bad coaching staff I was on, that was always the first thing that we would do is, who are our best dudes and who are their worst dudes, and who are some guys that we can go after. And that's going to be a key in the run game. So it's about formational. It's about trying to find ways where you're getting creative with motions and shifts. I would do more play calls this week and not scans. What I mean by that is, what Notre Dame did a little bit last week is they went and they got in the huddle. I would do more stuff like that. You know who Clemson is. Clemson's not a real tricky defense. They'll bring some edge pressures and walk some safeties down, but they're not a real tricky defense with guys moving all over. They're sort of like under Godwin. We're going to line up and we're going to come at you. Well, that kind of plays into your hands because you can do some shifts and motions and things like that where, you can out leverage them a bit if you're creative with how you motion and shift, right? That's a way to help protect your run game. And then the other part of it is do more things to protect your run game. That's also part of mixing up your run game. Incorporate RPOs, do some things where you're getting your quarterback out of the pocket a little bit, do some sprint outs where you're, sending the guy in motion. And if they're going to play tight, like if you're going in motion and they don't want to take Barrett Carter out of there, that's cool. Go in motion, send Lindsey or Styles on a quick slide and just out leverage them and get them out there because their corners play off a lot. I think they're going to come and play press, but you have to be prepared for them to play how they are on film. Get a quick slide route, do that 3-4 times. You just steal some easy yards. Next thing you know, bam, you come back with a sprint draw and you're taking that sucker out the back door with Chris Tyree or Logan Diggs, right? I mean, those are different things that you can do to protect your run game and or protect your offensive line where they don't have to just physically be better than Clemson for 80 straight snaps, right? Or 65, 70 straight snaps. Do some things where schematically you're giving them a chance to sort of say, hey, we don't have to block all 4 or 5 or 6 of these guys. We only got to block one because we're going out here. And I think those are some things schematically that Tommy Rees and the staff can do that will enhance the ability to run the football. Because if you can catch some of those gash plays and some of those type, because what did Florida State do, Ryan? I mean, how did Florida State rack up, was it over 130 yards in the first half? Part of it was things Notre Dame can't replicate. They can't call – like the first touchdown Florida State has is just read zone, Jordan Travis pulls it and runs 25 yards. They can do that. I mean, Drew Pine can pull that thing and run for 8-9 yards. He's not going to necessarily run for 25-30 where you got to make a guy miss in the backfield. It wasn't like Jordan Travis pulled it and there was nobody there. He pulled it, had to make a guy miss in the backfield, then he was gone, right? So there's some things you can do, Ryan, but it was mid-zone. They had an early mid-zone that got bounced outside, and then it was outside zone, outside zone, outside zone. Right? I mean, that's what they hurt him with. Now, Notre Dame is not going to all of a sudden become an outside zone team, but that's a play that they hurt Clemson with. Actually, I think the touchdown run by – I'll have to go look it up now. I'm starting to think that the touchdown run against Clemson in 2020 was actually an outside zone play. So I'm actually going to look that up because I remember the counter for sure. They hit a counter, 2 counters for touchdowns against Clemson or against Florida State that year. But anyway, the point is that inside and out, you don't want to be a team that's running left and right all game against Clemson. That's not where you want to make your living. But there's definitely some opportunities for that to where if you can – yes, I'm watching it now. It was an outside zone play. That's the touchdown run that they hit against Kyron Williams, outside zone to the left. So, there's some opportunities. They went basically 2 receivers to the right, a wing tight end to the left, and a W to the left. They just ran outside zone. They were able to get a nice kick out, just reached and got outside and sealed the linebackers off. So Liam Eichenberg had a great outside block on that. So, yes, it was outside zone now that I think about it. So mix that stuff in, right? Because then if Clemson's thinking, I got to run right, left a little bit, next thing you know, you're coming running inside zone or duo right up their behinds, and they're a little less prepared to brace themselves and go at you. And that's why I think those things are key.
Well, and I love that you started not with just because I feel like people hear diversifying the run game or, adding things to it. They just start thinking about, okay, so you want them to run more outside zone. You want them to run inside zone. And yes, the answer is yes. But also one of the big things that you were talking about to begin, and I agree 100%, is that if you change schematically the personnel that you're in, more 21 personnel, more 11, those things are things that Clemson right now has not seen on film much. They haven't seen it a ton, especially when Notre Dame's been at its best offensively. Like you've been seeing a ton of 12 and 13 to your point, right? Like they've been that type of more heavy run formation type of team so far. So if you come out and you do those things, I mean, naturally, right? If you are in a more spread look, your defense has to counteract that, right? So you're going to take extra guy out of the box. Like, again, I always say this, but football is a numbers game at the core. It's you want to exploit numbers and you want to win where you have a numbers advantage. Like those things are the biggest things in football. So get those numbers advantage by your alignments. And then after that, and I could not agree more because I think we just talked about it, offensive line needs to play a great football game. You need to be dominant there. But there is a way to help your offensive line. And diversifying the run game and giving them different looks makes the Barrett Carters, the Trenton Simpsons, the Jeremiah Trotter Juniors of the world.
Jalen Phillips, who comes downhill a lot in the run game. Yep.
Jalen Phillips, yep. Keith McGuire, when he comes in, because he plays a decent amount of football as well. It makes them not be able to be as predictive into what they're looking at, right? Oh, wow. I on film, all I saw was duo and inside zone all day. Where'd this outside zone come from? Where'd this counter come from? Where did this buck sweep come from? Where did all this come from? I'm not seeing it. My keys are just different than what I was anticipating them to be. Help your offensive line. And from there, if you're able to help your offensive line, I think that's where the matchups come, Brian. It's like, okay, can Joel beat a Miles Murphy one-on-one? That might be the key block on a play. When we've seen over the last couple of weeks, there's some plays where Joel ends up blocking two guys. It's
right.
awesome. But against Clemson, it's not going to be as effective as it is against Syracuse. Like, that's the point blank to it, right? So help your offensive line, diversify the run game.
And you talk about like an outside zone play, Ryan. The thing I like about outside zone is being a part of it, or a buck sweep, is you don't have to have a dominant block, right? Duo requires dominance. I mean, that's inside zone requires a level of dominance. Outside zone requires a level of it to a degree, but Joe Alt doesn't have to drive Miles Murphy back. He just has to wash him out or seal him. Those are the things that he has to do. And you go look at that outside zone that Notre Dame had against Clemson for a touchdown in 2020. There was one great block on that, just like great block where a guy just got dominated. And that was a block that Liam Eichenberg had on the second level. Here's the thing. They caught him in a slant, right? Clemson slanted away. Michael Mayer had a good block, but the linebacker comes across. Liam Eichenberg washes him out, and then Aaron Banks just gets to the second level and seals the guy off. He didn't destroy the guy, just sealed him off, and then bam, you open it up. Because the reality is, Ryan, in this kind of matchup, you don't need to run outside zone or buck sweep or whatever the case may be 15 times. No. You run it 4, 5, 6 times, and with the goal of being number one, to open up opportunities in two ways. One is on those plays, if to your point, they're not expecting it and they don't necessarily have their run fits keyed in as much as they would duo and counter and stuff like that, then you have the opportunity of catching them for a big play. And if that happens, now all of a sudden they're not as downhill oriented on your other stuff, which means you soften them up a little bit, right? And you soften them up with the outside stuff, and then now all of a sudden you're kind of going at them, and now they're like, okay, now we don't know what to do, right. And so those are going to be big parts of it. But as you said, and as we've said before, diversifying the run game is not just about play calls of the run game. It's also about how you run. It's about what you use to complement the runs. Your play actions, but more so RPOs. If Clemson wants to load the box, you've got to have some opportunities to get the ball outside. You're going to have to steal some yards.
And especially to run the ball, especially, Brian, like for this game, we talked about it, right? Your offensive line needs to be better than their defensive line on the day. And I think that you need to make the second and third levels of Clemson guess wrong. You need to make them uncomfortable, because right now, I mean, as a former linebacker, right? If I know that one or two things are coming and I can read and I can react really quick, I'm going to be successful. If you now start messing with my process and making my guessing game turn like completely into guessing, then that's where you catch guys in bad positions. Yeah. That's why you catch them late off of snaps. That stuff happens. So I really think it's playing better up front than what the defensive line gives you, winning that matchup, and manipulating the second and third levels. Like, that's the biggest thing for me, is like, you need to make them guess wrong, because they have a lot of speed, but you can use that speed to your advantage in certain ways. And I think making them guess wrong is a big way to do that.
Key number 4, they've got to attack the secondary. And we talked, kind of pre-gaming this. We've talked last week. It's not just one thing. This is a game where Tommy Rees needs to, and his staff, Jared Parker and Dylan McCullough and Chancey Stuckey, need to look at this and say, guys, our kids can make plays against them. I've talked to, coaching friends in the business, and I've said, hey, here's what I'm thinking about this game. Tell me I'm wrong. And they all say the same thing. Yeah, that secondary can be gone after. There's no question that secondary can be gone after. And it's inside and out. And that's going to be the key, is you can't just say go after the safeties, go after the corners. You go after both of them. And I think there's some plays to be made. Number one, their safeties, as we talked about yesterday, Ryan, their safeties have given up 695 passing yards. That's over double what Notre Dame safeties have given up this year. Double. Yep. You've got to find ways to use your run game and use your formations that they're going to key on. Use your tendencies against them. Know your own tendencies, know how Clemson will play those, and then use them to attack. That means, go 12 personnel where Michael Mayer is ISO blocking, right? Or solo blocking, where he's staying in. It's a max pro, and you run double post behind him, right?
Mhm.
Or a seam in behind them where you're going to get Clemson to bite down hard on that and take a shot. Run a corner route, out cuts, run maybe a play action where you get Drew Pine out of the pocket and those type of things. Those are things that you can do where you're going to attack the safeties and then just attack them up the seams with dropbacks. I mean, there's different things that you can do. Get those linebackers running with under routes and then come behind them with stuff. There's opportunities there. Seams between the safeties and linebackers. Deep in cuts where the linebackers fly, because the linebackers do a really good job of driving on crossing routes, right? And I think they do anyway. Well, use that. And so run a drive, have Michael Mayer be your drive guy where he just is going to, hey, Mayer, Mike, your job is you're going to step right on the linebacker's toes, man, and run right across their faces and let them know here comes the stud. And because they're going to collision the heck out of him. And you know what they're doing? Know what happens? What they can't do if they're collisioning Mayer? They can't get depth to cover the 15 to 20 yard in cut to Lindsey or to Mitchell Evans out of 12 personnel, right? Like, I mean, Ryan, even something simple like a 12 I mean, this is old school pass play stuff that I think could work against Clemson. You have your 12 personnel 2x2, right? Run Mayer on a cross and Mitchell Evans on a 15-yard in cut. And you know what you're doing behind it? You've got a post route from Braden Lindsey right behind it because those linebackers are going to crash on Mayer. And if that safety comes down on Mitchell Evans, you're banging that post route over top. If the safety stays back and you're kind of using Lindsey as sort of a clear because you want the safety to see him. So I'd actually do it from kind of a reduced alignment because you want you want that safety to see Lindsey now. Because what you're trying to open up is that inside route to Mitchell Evans. Things like that, or if you're going to go out of 12 personnel with the twins to the right and you've got Mitchell Evans there, run the high-low backside, but then have Mayer run that cross right there. Have this number 2 receiver run a seam route to take out that and then run the outside guy on a 15 to 20-yard in that way. These are old-school pass plays that I know Notre Dame has in their offense that are things that could really work against this team, out of the things that you do. But those are all isolations where you're trying to put the safeties in a bind and trying to isolate opportunities to go after their safeties. But here's the deal. One of the things I've seen on film, Ryan, is their corners do not play the football well at all.
Yeah.
You've got to get Tobias Merriweather. You've got to get Deion Colsey, and you've got to get Braden Lindsey in some opportunities to just go. Just go. And if you can do some things like that, hey, listen, Drew, if we get a one-on-one and I call this play, you stare right at that safety until you get to the top of your drop, and then you just throw it outside. There's no read, dude. No read. Get to your drop and let her rip. You can't be late with this throw because there's no read. You're hitting your drop, you're standing right at the single high safety, and then just throw that sucker out to Tobias or Deion or Braden or whatever the case may be. You've got to take those shots. Tommy did that in 2020 to Javon McKinley, and they crushed Clemson. These corners aren't as good as those corners, right? Some of them are the same, and they haven't gotten any better. Sheridan Jones was played in that game too, and he hasn't gotten really any better. So you've got to be willing to be aggressive. I want to see Notre Dame attack Clemson. Attacking doesn't mean you throw 87 bombs. Attacking means, maybe you push the tempo a little bit, but just be aggressive. Don't be afraid of them. Because Marcus Freeman said, hey, we're Notre Dame. We've got to go after them. Well, you show your players that you actually believe that by your play calling. And let Clemson know, hey, fellas, we're not nickel and diming you today. We're coming at you. Right. We're coming at you. And if you hit a couple of those, now all of a sudden Clemson's like, poof. This is why I said earlier in the week, Ryan, if you look at the USC Notre Dame game in 2017. Now, again, this Clemson defense is better than that defense. But that was a decent USC defense that year, right? I mean, it wasn't great, but it was a pretty good USC defense that year. At least it was early before Notre Dame just annihilated them and took their soul, and they were never the same team after that. But if you go back and look at that game, Ryan, Notre Dame, that game went 9 of 22 for 120 yards. That's it. And Notre Dame rushed for 377 yards in that game. But the key to that game was Brandon Wimbush's arm. I just said 9 of 22 for 120 yards, but he hit a post route and a back shoulder in the first quarter down the field for 2 touchdowns, and USC was like, okay, now I don't know what to do now. Right? We had geared everything towards stopping the run this week, and they just scored 2 touchdowns throwing the ball over our head. I don't know what we're supposed to do now. And that's the kind of thing you need to do. We saw something like that against Clemson or NC State that year as well. They hit, remember that backside seam route down the field? They hit to Durham Smythe to set up a touchdown. They had another shot down the field. Like, when you can do those things and you're a power running team, teams are like, well, shoot, now we don't know what to do. And you've got to make sure you're designing them where they're easy reads for Drew, right? It can't be like okay, I'm going to my fourth read is the post route. You know what I mean? It can't be that. It's got to be, dude, you got 1, 2, inside post, outside post, right? Go route, deep out. That's it. That's your read. Scissors, post. I think smash is a play that I think they can run this week. I would love to see them hit a boundary corner to Mitchell Evans on a 2 tight end smash cut. Run Michael Mayer on just a wide hitch or a wide stop, and then send Mitchell Evans on the corner and just throw that sucker out to him. I promise you that'll be there this week, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's there in the secondary. You just got to design it well. You got to protect it, and it's up to Drew to then say, I got to go hit it, man. And then we kind of circle back to the beginning where they need Drew Pine to just play good football this week. He doesn't have to play out of his mind, shaking off blitzes, running around, breaking tackles, throwing across his body. They don't need him to do all that, right? If he does, great. Just, dude, here's the throw. Here's the read. You got this.
Right.
And if he can be that guy and say, well, Drew Pine can't be that guy. Yeah, he can. And he's been that guy. We've seen it. We saw it against North Carolina. We saw it against BYU. If that dude shows up on Saturday and Tommy Reese has a good game, Notre Dame can move the ball in Clemson. And they can score on Clemson, and they can beat Clemson.
Even though the cornerback group isn't as good as it has been in the past, Brian, it's weird because they still implement them kind of the same. Like they're not gonna mask things too much on the back end. Like, the corners are going to be in man-to-man a ton. They're going to be on islands, and they're just going to say, you're going to be better than Notre Dame's dudes, right? Like, we saw it against Wake Forest. Like, they left their guys in man-to-man against Wake all day, and it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense.
They never adjusted. How
many one-on-one go balls did Sam Hartman throw that game? Like, it was just ridiculous, man. Just like outside one-on-one, just let your guy get an opportunity. That's what you're talking about, right? Like, that's what you're saying. So the opportunities are going to be there. Have to make the play, right? Like, there's no excuse not to make that play, because you can't tell me, and again, I'll keep going back to this, but I will, even if Notre Dame's wide receivers aren't playing well in spurts and the quarterback play isn't good in spurts, I'll still take Tobias Merriweather one-on-one against Nate Wiggins. I'll still take it. Take it. I'll take that chance. I'll take Deion Colsey one-on-one against Nate Wiggins. I'll take the shot. I'll take it.
Or Sheridan Jones. Yep.
Or Sheridan Jones. Yep. Lorenzo Styles. I'll take that shot. I'll take it.
And if you see those first two guys, Ryan, matched up against Toriano Pride, who I like, but he's a nickel right now.
Yeah.
But they'll put him outside. He's 5'10". If you don't go after him, and that's what Wake Forest did. As soon as they saw Toriano Pride in the game, they went right at him. And what does Wake have on the perimeter? They got 6'2", 6'3" guys that can get down the field a little bit, right? And they went right at him. They went right at him, and they drew a couple pass interferences on top of the shots that they hit. So I want to see some of that. Attack the secondary. So those are the keys for offense.
And I also would be very okay with seeing Tobias in the slot at times too, working some, deep shots in that regard. Talk about Michael Mayer with his 6'4" and a half, 265 pound frame, or whatever the heck he's listed at now. You're going against guys that are, Barrett Carter is 6'1", 225. Solid size for the position, but at the end of the day, you have length on him, obviously. The safeties for Clemson are not the biggest guys in the world. Their best safety, in my opinion, is probably Andrew Makuba, and he's like 5'11", 5'10". Like, he's not the biggest guy. Jalen Phillips isn't the biggest guy in the world. You have size advantages everywhere if you choose to use it, on top of them just not being very good in coverage so far this year. So opportunities are there. They are.
Can I tell you a personnel grouping and an alignment that I would love to see Notre Dame use in this game?
For sure.
I'm gonna draw it up real quick because I want this to make sense to you, Ryan. It's a 13 personnel passing alignment, okay? And this is what I want to see, okay? So It's going to be this right here. Right? Can you see that? Do you see that, Ryan?
I can see that, yes.
Mayer and Tobias out wide in the twins. You get Mitchell Evans and Holden Stace in your wing, and you got your running back. You got everything you love out of 12 personnel in the run game. Everything. Because Holden's a decent blocker, and Mitchell Evans is blocked really well. And you've got Tobias and Mayer outside. And if Clemson is going to go one-on-one outside, I'm throwing RPOs to Mayer. I'm throwing bubble screens to Tobias if you need to. I'm running flood out of that. Because you got your running back out. You can easily run a flood. You can run a sprint out flood to that easily. And then to your point, I've got some play action stuff as well. Because now Clemson has to say, because here's the thing. You may think we're in 13 personnel. They're going to be in their base. They're going to be in their big boy formation. Correct. So then if you have Mayer and Tobias outside and a running back right there, you can easily get into a three release look. Easily. And so in that type of situation, and then you could motion Holden Stace across to get him if you want to get him where, you're in the 2x2, but you get the point that I'm making there. Yep. Now, all of a sudden, though, you have to make some decisions. Do you want to get Barrett Carter out of the box to help protect get underneath some seams and some in cuts and some comebacks, or that's where you're going to get your help? Do you need to get him out wide a little bit to protect against the swing route? Because I would run swing route. I'd get Chris Tyree right there as running back and run a flood concept. Go by Mayer, out by Tobias, and then just run a swing. And the read is super simple. See that flat defender? If he comes up on Tyree, bang the out cut. If he stays back, throw a swing to Chris Tyree or Logan Diggs, because Logan doesn't have the speed Tyree does, but Logan can make a dude miss. Chris is more of an outrun people. Logan's a guy that can make people miss. Both have benefits in that look. That's a real simple thing that I know is in the offense schematically that are things that you can do to the point earlier where now you've helped your run game because you have now put them in some thoughts where, dude, we got to treat this like a passing formation. Think about that. They've got to treat that like a passing formation. And now all of a sudden you're running your duo right there to the opposite side of that. You're running your inside zone right there. You're running your counter back to that because now they've got to widen out and you've now softened them up just formationally because you're willing to throw out of that. Right. Like that's the kind of stuff that I want to see where you're, to your point, Ryan, I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm not going empty out of 10 personnel, right? This is who you want to be. These are things you can do out of who you want to be that give you a chance to be successful. And that's the stuff that I want to see from Tommy Rees this week, no doubt.
You know what's exciting out of that too, Brian, is just, Mayer runs a hitch and then you have like a slot fade with Tobias working against one of those safeties. Like that's
if they're going to come up and play press, that's the thing you do. And that's what I like about Smash this week too, Ryan, is if they're going to come up and play press, man, on the outside, I'm running Mayer on a wide hitch, and I'm having Tobias ISO and spin that corner of the ground and bang him on an outcut. And you know what you do? You come back after you've run Smash after that. You come right back at it. You've hit them with that Smash concept. The next thing you do is you show that Smash again, bang them outside, and then come back inside on a corner post.
Yeah. And you could even make it a smash where you tell Tobias literally what we just talked about. If they come up and press, make it a fade instead of the true smash, or if they're off, then you just run the smash. Right. Like there's so much that you can do out of that, man. It really
and it's simple stuff. It's simple stuff. Yes. It's not real complex stuff. So anyway, that's those are different things that I want to see. And you hit a couple of those throws out of 13 personnel, and now Clemson's like, uh-oh, what are we gonna do now? Right? So I love it. Ryan, let's move over to the defense and talk about the keys to victory on the defense. And I think the first one is sort of an overarching one that's going to be part of every single one. And it is this. It is a simple one, but it is an important one. Tackle, 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 tackle. This is not a game you can give up cheap yards. Clemson is going to try to get the ball in space all game long, whether it's with their run game, whether it's with their running backs out of the backfield, whether it's with their perimeter throws. They're going to run their RPOs. They're going to run their tunnels. They're going to run their quick game. They're going to do all that kind of stuff because they want to get you in space. You've got to tackle. You've got to tackle. You've got to tackle. Make Clemson earn every single yard that they get in this game, because this is not a typical Clemson offense, right? It's not. It's a good Clemson offense, but it's not an elite Clemson offense. They have benefited from cheap plays. Corner against, what was it, Florida State, a corner turning Antonio Williams loose because he, just not being disciplined and just giving him that cheap yard. Antonio Williams is a good player. But what you can't do against a good player is then let him get easy 50-yard touchdowns. You got to make them work for it, because they're not going to be able to consistently work for it, in my opinion, against this Notre Dame defense. Don't give up the cheap plays because you didn't tackle, right? And you could easily be disciplined in there as well, but that's a given. That's not a key this week, because it's kind of a given against this Clemson team and all the different things they do. But, man, the safeties, especially – the safeties and the corners, even more so than other position groups, Ryan. This is a week where they have to be on top of their game. This is a week where Mike Mickens and Chris O'Leary have to kind of earn their paychecks like we saw Brian Mason and Harry Heastand do last week. Right? Remember that tweet I sent out in the middle of the game? Like, man, Harry Heastand and Brian Mason need pay raises. I want to be tweeting that about Chris O'Leary and Mike Mickens after this game. I think Mike Mickens has kind of already done that for the most part, but I really want to see it this weekend. And that to me is key numero uno in this game, right? You've got to tackle. You've got to tackle. You've got to tackle.
If you ask me who are the two players that most worry me offensively for Clemson, the answers would be Will Shipley and it would be Antonio Williams. What do both those players have in common? They can turn a mistake into a big game, right? Like Will Shipley's got some nice acceleration. He's got some good vertical speed. If you are a wrong gap on him or you miss a tackle, he can break one. And Antonio Williams is the same deal, man. That's why they put him in the slot, because they want to get him the ball in space. When a player takes a bad angle or they miss a tackle, he can make a chunk play, right? Like, I'm not really worried about Joseph Ngata and Takari Collins and Bo Collins breaking tackles and creating huge plays. Like, I'm more worried about them making huge plays with their size down the field. Those are the two players, though, that if you miss a tackle, they can make you pay. And I agree with you, Brian. Like, the fundamentals of their offense is still, they're going to spread you out and they're going to let their athletes be athletes. That's point blank period to it. That's how they win football games. And the two biggest guys are the biggest examples of that. Do not let Will Shipley get easy yards. Do not let Antonio Williams, be able to, don't come up as a safety and make a bad angle where you let him get an easy run and be able to, turn a 10-yard gain into a 30-yard gain.
Or even this, Ryan, don't let a 2-yard gain turn into an 8-yard gain. I mean, it's not always just the big plays that can hurt you. It's you got a chance to stop an RPO behind the line. Let's say they run a little now screen. Cam Hart beats his guy, comes flying up and misses the tackle. And Antonio Williams makes a miss and runs for 8 yards. You went from 2nd and 12 to 2nd and 2 just like that. Like, it's not a 40-yard gain, but those are drive-defining type of mistakes. Right? If you're a defensive lineman and you've got a chance to sack DJ Uiagalelei, bring him down, right? Don't miss him and let him throw an incompletion. 2nd and 17 is a whole lot better than 2nd and 10 for the defense, right? And you definitely don't let him scramble. So you're going to have chances to make stops and key stops, and you've got to make them. That's a big key. Number 2, this is a consistent one. Right? Relatively weekly, we talk about this in some fashion. This is a game where I'm going to make DJ beat me. I'm not going to let Will Shipley, I'm not going to let the offensive line beat me. You got to shut down the run game. But here's the key. You can't shut down the run game with numbers. If you shut down the run game with numbers, like you said, you talked about it in the last key, Ryan, with Bo Collins, and the size of Bo Collins and Joseph Ngata and the quickness and speed of Antonio Williams, they have receivers that can hurt you if you're overplaying the run. This is a game where the D-line and the linebackers have to be great. It starts up front. Penetration, man. You've got to make Will Shipley and Phil Maffa make their cuts on their counters and their zones at least 2-3 yards behind the line of scrimmage, at least. And that requires you to attack. If you see them pulling on the counter, you do what you did last week. Crash it hard with your backside end and take your linebacker over top to protect against the read. That's the stuff that you need to do, right? You've got to be disciplined on the backside, right? Because the quarterback will pull it and run it. So you can't overcommit to those things, but it's discipline on the second level and aggressiveness on the first level. Those to me are keys, because if you can keep your linebackers free, meaning they're not getting blocked by linemen, and you let them run, that's how you slow down their run game. The defensive line has to reset the line of scrimmage in their favor, snap after snap after snap. That's what they've got to do. It's very, very important they do that.
One of the most impressive things that we saw last week from Notre Dame against Syracuse was their run defense. You know, they took a huge step forward, I believe. And even after giving up a 21-yard run on the first drive, they hold them to 60-something yards. And they showed against a good rushing attack against Sean Tucker, who's one of the best running backs in all of college football, that if they read their keys and maintain their discipline and do not do things to hurt themselves, they can be pretty good in the front seven. They can. Notre Dame has that type of talent. This is going to be another big test for them. You're playing against a pretty big offensive line, but you're playing against a really talented running back in Will Shipley and a hammer in Phil Maffa behind him. So you're going to need a little bit of difference type of, differentiation of talents from to both running backs as far as from skill sets perspective. And you have another challenge in front of you, man. You need your linebackers to stack really good games back to back to back, because they had a pretty good game against UNLV. They had a very good game against Syracuse. You need to have another really good game on the second level in this one. You need to be able to shut down, because, Brian, last week Notre Dame didn't sacrifice numbers to stop the run last week. They were just aggressive and they were disciplined and they stopped the run. You need a similar one to your point, right? Like, I don't want to be forced to sneak an extra man in the box because I can't stop the run. That is like the worst case scenario for Notre Dame. Stop them with 6. At times you're going to have 7, whatever it is, but you need to be able to stop the run this week, because at the end of the day, all of Clemson's play action, RPO, everything is built off of their ability to run the football. Make this team one-dimensional, and it starts with stopping the run, in my opinion.
So Ryan, when I think about what you just said, I think back to the Syracuse game, and you can't have Brandon Joseph do what he did if you're stopping the run game because your safeties. Can't. Because he can't play the pass game. You saw him be allowed to be a pass game weapon because the linebackers were playing well and the D-line was playing well. Right? Yep. That's the deal. So to me, I think that's kind of where this is. If you can stop the run game with your box, then I think you've got a chance to have success. That's going to be key. Because, people talk about Clemson's – this is where the biggest difference between Clemson now and Clemson when they were really in their peak is they were a 200-plus yard per game run game. Their numbers look good this game, but it's built off of 2 games, Louisiana Tech and Syracuse. They haven't gone over 170 yards in any of their other 6 games, right? You've got to keep them in check. You've got to keep the run game down, because I'm going to make DJ beat me, and that gets to key number 2. I want to get in his head. Now, it's not about pressuring him only. That's key number 1 to getting in his head. Consistent pressure. Notice I didn't say sack him a bunch. Notice I say hit him a bunch. I said pressure him, because you made a great point yesterday, Ryan. Sometimes I don't necessarily want a sack of DJ. I want him rushing that throw with that long release and that inaccuracy. I could see him trying to throw an inside hitch route that hits Cam Hart, who's behind him, in the chest. He's capable of that, right? Yep. And it's because you get him out of rhythm, get him rushing his reads, rushing his throws, and looking at the rush. Those are the keys. And that doesn't come because you had 3 or 4 third down sacks that stopped drives. That comes because you're getting in his face on play action. You're getting his face on first down. You're getting your hands up and batting down balls. You're jumping routes. You're disguising your coverages. He's thinking he's got an easy hitch route, and Cam Hart almost picks it off, because he came down. You're able to play too high safety against him, where he doesn't have the open stuff down the field because your box is shut down the run. You do all those kind of things. That's going to be a key. And the thing that I like about this is potentially happening is a lot of that stuff is built off of the things you need to do to stop the run. If you're getting great penetration against the run, then you just keep on that track when you see that the running back doesn't have the football and it's a pass, right? If I'm Jason Adamiola and I'm slanting and I'm beating this guy in the B gap, I'm either blowing up the run or I'm going to continue on my track and go get the quarterback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also this is a game. Talk about money games, Ryan. You're a draft guy. For Isaiah Foskey and Jason Adamiola, this is a money game.
Yep.
This is that game where they don't care that you didn't do anything against Marshall. When they watch this game and say, did you see what he did to Clemson? Did you see how he finished the year? He was clearly getting used to new coaching early. You can use that excuse. But, man, late in the year, boy, did you see him week after he's running hip to hip with Sean Tucker and making plays behind the line, and he goes out there and does this to Clemson against Jordan McFadden? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Same thing with Jason Adamiola. They are keys to this game as part of points 1 and 2. What do we always say? To win big games, your stars got to play like stars. And that's true for these two kids more than anybody else on the Notre Dame defense. Foskey and Adamiola have to be the key ingredient to points 2 and 3, the run game and then getting in DJ's head. So important. They didn't play well against Ohio State.
They didn't.
They need to play well in this game. This is their makeup game. This is their money game. If they both play well, Clemson's going to have a hard time scoring a lot of points. There's no doubt.
And this is one of those matchups where your strength needs to be a strength in this football game. This is one that you could dominate, because it's Clemson's offensive line is better than it was in 2021, no doubt. But is it great? No, still not. Still not. You
Very
have
steady.
clear advantages. Yeah, they're steady offensive line. You have there is no player that in a one-on-one situation against Isaiah Foskey that should be able to stop him. There's not a single player. I mean, he's not going to win every rep, but in a big situation, if you have him in a one-on-one opportunity, he needs to make it, man. And I love the fact that we're also talking about different ways to mess with DJ's mind, right, Brian? Because, last week we saw it, right? That first play of the game where Brandon Joseph House called that interception, I thought it was man coverage before the snap, and then all of a sudden he just drops down and picks 6, and DJ will do that. He'll try that if you kind of confuse him a little bit. So I think that there's a lot of different ways to mess with his mind, whether it's, bluffing and dropping off into different zones, whether it's disguising coverages and lining up in man, and then here comes some different variation of zone coverage, whether it's getting after the quarterback with only 4. All those things can kind of parlay into one simple fact that DJ, when he rushes his process, is not nearly as good as when he is comfortable. We talked about that yesterday. This is a game where you want him to be forced to make mistakes and be forced to make negative plays. That is one of the biggest keys of this game, obviously, is that you want DJ Uiagalelei to not feel comfortable and to make some rush decisions in this football game.
Ryan, there's going to be a lot of NFL scouts at this game.
Oh, yeah.
How many times you cover the draft, you've gotten to know a lot of agents, you've gotten to know a lot of scouts over the years. We were talking to a scout from the Broncos at the Syracuse game, and he's there with an agenda of who he's looking to see play, right?
Yep.
But scouts also watch the other team too.
Oh, yeah.
There's going to be scouts there that are going to be saying, I'm really looking forward to seeing 11 and 98 on the other team's defense. I think Miles Murphy's a top 10 pick. I think that Brian Bursey is a top 10 pick or top 20 pick or whatever. I'm here to see them.
Right.
And I'm here to see them against the Notre Dame offensive line. There's going to be a lot of scouts with that in mind. But this is what I talk about when we talk about the money game for Isaiah Foskey and Jason Adamiola. This isn't what they should be thinking about, but this is the opportunity. Yeah. I came here to see 98 and left thinking number 7's the best defensive lineman on the field today.
That's a great point.
57. Boy, you know what? He doesn't have Bursey's size and all this, but that dude's a better football player. You know what I mean? That happens all the time in scouting. I came here to see this dude, but I kept watching this dude because he was better. And now, does that mean all of a sudden I've changed my draft stock? No, but you know what that does mean? I'm going to go back and let the people know that this number 7 we need to do a deeper dive into. And this number 57 is a guy we need to be thinking about on late, day 2 and day 3, because this kid's a really good football player. And so that's when I talk about money games. It's not just people there to see you, people that can watch your film later. It's that you got a chance to make a strong impression. And more importantly, if you do that it means you helped your football team win. And that's going to be a big key.
It's
Point
a,
in this one.
Go
ahead.
I was just going to say, Brian, it's a different prospect matchup. Usually guys would think, Isaiah Foskey versus Jordan McFadden, that's the prospect matchup. But to your point, you have one stellar defensive end on one side and another really talented one on the other. He can steal the fanfare off of that, right? Like he can still steal the glow. And I just think it was a great point. Just had to compliment you there for a second. You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. I made an NFL draft point. Go, Brian. All right, let's go to point number 4. This is a big one, Ryan. This is the biggest concern that I have. And when I first started talking about it, because so what we'll do is Ryan and I will kind of sit down and say, okay, I'll say, here are my keys. Ryan, where are we on the same page? What are some areas where, you think that we should go a different direction? And normally we're pretty much on the same page. But here's a point that I made. I said, look, I'm concerned about the tight ends. I'm really concerned about the tight ends up the seams hurting Notre Dame with 30, like 2 or 3 just chunk plays. Their tight ends have 35 catches on the season. I've seen both of them make big plays. We saw Davis Allen catch 30, 40-yard gain on the first play of the game right up the seam against Syracuse. That concerns me, especially as you're trying to gear towards the run. But then Ryan started talking about that's true, but we started talking about Antonio Allen over the middle, so it kind of turned into a big key to this game is Notre Dame has to defend the seams. They have to limit the big plays sort of in that seam box, which means linebackers have to be disciplined, means the safeties have to be disciplined. They've got to drive on guys because this is where – Syracuse got him to hit it early. But later in the game, the Syracuse linebackers started doing a better job of getting depth. The safety started doing a better job of closing routes off. And all of a sudden, DJ starts kind of forcing those throws over the middle. He sails one, and bam, Syracuse picks it off. Right? If you can be disciplined and make the windows tight. I thought they did a really good job of that for the most part against Syracuse. Right? They hit a couple over the middle, one blown coverage. One was just a kid made a great play against Street Bracey and just beat him. Right? But that's where they're going to go. That's part of their offense. Syracuse had success with it. 1 + 1 = 2, Ryan. You've got to have a better job. I thought they defended it better late. You've got to take that stuff away. You cannot let them have a bunch of chunk because he could have 100+ yards just on stuff up the seams, and you just can't let them get that. That's the stealing big yards that you have to eliminate. So instead of going, big play, don't let big plays. This is the area where I'm most concerned about because they're going to hit a couple plays down the field. They're going to hit a back shoulder that there's nothing you can do about. That's just going to happen. You can limit those with your pressure. Right? You can help out over the top and take those away. But you have to be able to defend those seam shots. That's where DJ gets most comfortable. But that's also where DJ will make the most mistakes if you're pressuring him. Right. So if you're defending the seams effectively and you're doing a good job of getting pressure on him, that's where some big mistakes will happen. So, we could easily say, get turnovers. But those are simple, right? We're trying to tell you how those turnovers happen. And to me, this is one of those. Consistent pressure, DJ trying to throw a seam throw off of his back foot. If you can start having him do those, I don't care about a sack because unless it's a strip sack, I like that play better because he just sailed one because, Howard Cross is in his face or Jason or Riley or Isaiah, somebody's in his face. Padelho, Justin, I don't care who. Somebody's in his face. He throws a seam right off his back foot. It sails right into the hands of Ramon Henderson or Brandon Joseph or Xavier Watts or somebody. I really hope Xavier Watts because that's the one safety that I'm like, I want to get that dude in space with the ball. You know what I mean? But that's going to be a big part of this one as well for the Notre Dame defense, right?
Because Clemson also has diversity, what they can put in the slot, right? We talked about Antonio Williams. He is that true slot type. Think about, not quite the same player, but what Amari Rodgers meant to the Clemson offense, right? He's that type of slot. Has good speed, quickness, will be elusive after the catch. But then there will be one play where they're going to throw Allen in there, and he's a big 6'6", 250-pound tight end. And then they'll put Jake Bringenstall, or however the heck you pronounce his last name, in there, who's 6'6", 230. And he's a little bit more of a sleek mover than what Davis Allen is. So they have diversity to throw in there. And that's not even to mention because they don't do it a ton, but Will Shipley's a guy that can move into the slot a little bit and could do some things in that department as well.
And can do it out of the backfield as well. They'll get him the ball out of the backfield. Yes, correct.
Yep. So they have diversity also with how they can attack the slot or the seam. So those are a big test because Notre Dame's done a pretty good job at that during the year. Like they haven't been really killed by slots or tight ends for the most part. So you need your Rovers to play good ball. You need Tariq Bracy to play good ball. And if it's a Brandon Joseph or whatever safety coming down and playing some in the slot as well, you need those guys to be able to stop those big plays down the middle. Because if DJ's got a really strong arm, he does. And those seam throws are some balls that he can make if he sees it right and if there's a guy open. So those things are things that you have to eliminate in this football game, or at least limit the impact that they can have, because Notre Dame's been pretty good at defending the seam for the most part this year.
Ryan, I think final key for me as we talk about the team as a whole, and we'll go into special teams here in a second. But, this is one of those games where I feel like for one of these two teams, I don't know who it's going to be, but for one of these two teams, this is one of those, this is where your legend is made, right? This is where your reputation is truly defined. And you talk about, well, this is why you come to Notre Dame, and that's very true, but it's one of those things where, yeah, this is where you come to Notre Dame, but it's the guys that stepped up and made those plays that did it, right? And that's going to be the key. And sometimes it's the stars. Sometimes would Notre Dame fans remember Stance Magala the same way if he didn't have the pick six against Rodney Peete in the number 1 versus number 2 game that vaults Notre Dame into the national championship, right? Would teams remember Sean Wooden, who was a very good player, as much if it wasn't for the breakup at the end of the Florida State game, right? I mean, those are the things you think about. You say, yeah, this guy was great, but you know what? You remember that play Reggie Brooks had against Michigan? You remember that touchdown catch that he had against Penn State? You remember Jerome Bettis's run against Florida. Not a lot. I mean, a lot of people know Jerome Bettis was good, but a lot of younger fans don't remember. They don't really remember Jerome Bettis, but they've seen the Sugar Bowl on YouTube of Jerome running off. That's you. You weren't old enough to remember. Were you even born when that game? You were born when that game was played, right? But not very. You weren't very old. Was 92.
I was one.
So you were like, yeah, right. But
yeah.
I guarantee you've watched that game on YouTube when you've seen Jerome go off, right?
Sure.
And so that's the thing too, is this is one of those games where you want to remember, this is how your career is remembered. So and so that wasn't normally a star, boy, he really stepped up in this game, right? Do you know why everyone remembers that my age remembers Adrian Jarrell? He didn't do a whole lot in his Notre Dame career. I remember the reverse he had for a touchdown against Florida State. You know what I mean? Those are the type of things that you get. And this is kind of the thing where this game is an opportunity for that, Ryan. It's for that guy who, if Drew Pine comes out and plays great in this game, all's forgiven for the last 3. That's always the opportunity this kind of game presents. And they're going to need someone who's not – you're going to need your stars to play well. But you know what? Clemson has their stars too. This game, ultimately, to me, the stars got to play like stars. But at the end of the day, the difference between the two teams is whose complementary players step up and say, I'm going to make a play today. That's going to be a big part to this game as well, Ryan.
I mean, every joy is built off of memories, man. It is. And you just mentioned a great one. I mean, you just mentioned Jerome Bettis in, that massive game that was 30 years ago now. And now we're covering Jerome Bettis Jr. visiting on a recruiting trip. Like, it's wild, man. It's absolutely wild. But to your point, years from now, if Notre Dame gets a big Clemson victory this night, like, let's say, like, I'm going to use Drew Pine as an example because Drew's had a couple rough games in a row. But if he has a big game against Clemson on Saturday, that's what people are going to remember. Wow, Drew in the biggest game of the year, up until that point after some adversity early, showed out and he beat Clemson, at home in a big environment and a big moments, right? Like, that's what people remember. So things are built on memories. And to your point, Brian, like, the dudes need to be dudes, but more than anything, man, like, you need guys to be excited to play. You need guys to make some plays, man, because you got to be loose for this type of game. Like, I don't want these guys go into this game and just be tight and afraid to make a mistake. Nah, man. Like, Brandon Joseph was loose last week, right? And he made a play, made a couple plays. Be loose. That's the things that you remember. And I hope you remember this one for a good reason. I hope you remember it for a really good reason.
Before we finish up with the keys and go to the mailbag, I do want to touch on special teams because There's two parts of this game that are very evenly matched. If you look at and you talk about like struggling units. I like the Fermo efficiency index. I don't know if you've ever looked at that. I know Brian Fermo a little bit. I think he does pretty decent, pretty good work. He has the Notre Dame offense number 51 in the country in efficiency, and the Clemson offense 58 in efficiency. Neither are that good. He's got the Notre Dame defense 16th in the country in efficiency, and Clemson 11th. Very close. He's got the Clemson special teams 8th in the country, and Notre Dame is 6th. So this is that game where your special teams has to not let their special teams impact this game. That's key number one for the Notre Dame special teams. Would it be great to get a block punt? Sure. Would it be great to get a big return? Absolutely. The keys for me, however, are vitally important in a game like this. Don't let their special teams make a play. Right? Because you're looking at Florida State, for example, 24-14 at half, should have been closer. They missed some opportunities. Clemson starts with the ball. You get a stop. You've moved the ball well on Clemson's defense. You go down and score. It's a ball game. What breaks that game open? Will Shipley's 69-yard kick return gets them great field position. They score the very next play. Ball game. Clemson just couldn't – Florida State couldn't come back from that, right? You look at Notre Dame in 2015. You think, they lost by 2 and had that 2-point conversion shot. There was 2 special teams plays in that game that really hurt Notre Dame. The shanked punt by Tyler Newsome that gave Clemson like a 25-yard field for a touchdown, and then coming out of the half, I think it was coming out of the half, you fumble the kick return, and they get the ball, and they go down. No, I'm sorry. You fumbled, CJ Prosise fumbled, I believe is a sequence of events. They scored, then you fumbled the kick return. Now, Notre Dame ended up making a stop on that play. Cole Luke picked off Deshaun Watson on one of those fumbles, the second fumble. But you lost time. You lost time that you needed in a game. If there was 3-4 minutes left in that game, maybe Notre Dame doesn't feel the need to go for 2 there. Let's kick. We got field timeouts left. Let's get some stops and go back on it. Or, they could have gone for 2, but then still had time to get a stop and get the ball back where you need a field goal to win. And they had the most accurate Notre Dame kicker I've ever seen, who had already nailed a 48-yarder in the rain that game in Justin Yoon. I feel good about that one. So those are the things where even if you stop them, you gave them time. You lost possessions. And so the special teams has to play a clean game. No turnovers. Don't let them pin you at the 12. Don't let them get a 25-yard punt return to midfield. Don't let Will Shipley take one back past midfield. Those are the things you have to avoid in this game. And then if you can then make plays on your own, that's great. But key number one on special teams this week is I don't care about the flashy plays as much as I care about do your job every single snap this week on special teams. That's going to be so incredibly important. So incredibly important.
Again, like a lot of those things are self-inflicted, right? Like you're on a coverage unit, you take a bad angle to the football, or you vacate your lane integrity, from a punting perspective, kind of from the execution, like you hit it off the side of your foot, you let a guy loose. Like there's a lot of those things are self-inflicted, Brian. And again, this is a game where against a top 5 team nationally at home, you're already playing a really good team, right? Like you don't need to play against yourself. Like I say that all the time, but it is so true. Like you don't need to have those types of self-inflicted things. Like those guys are going to make plays on their own because they're good football players. You don't need to help them out. Like that stuff is just right. Because I agree. It's about being clean. Clean was the word that was in my mind before you even said it kind of at the end of your excerpt, right? Like you need to be clean. You need to be efficient. Can't shoot yourself in the foot. Like I think even last year, when Notre Dame was playing against Cincinnati, like one big momentum boost for Cincinnati in that football game in the first half was when Chris Tyree fumbled that kickoff, right? Like those things are self-inflicted, and that wasn't Cincinnati going down and making a great strip or getting their helmet on the football. Like that was just self-inflicted bad ball handling. Like you can't have those types of things in this football game, no doubt about it.
Well, and you talk about that game, and the Notre Dame defense ended up holding them to a field goal. Right? But it was the second big mistake you had because your offense also gave up an interception, allowed them to get a touchdown. So now all of a sudden, just take that field goal. Notre Dame gets the ball at the end of the game down 24-13. What happens in that situation if it's 21-13? Right? I mean, that's the thing is like now all of a sudden you got a chance to go down and tie this ball game up. You're looking at things completely differently. What if all of a sudden you don't make both of those mistakes and you give the ball to Drew Pine and it's 14-13, and you just need a field goal.
Yep.
I mean, those are the things. It's like against a good team like this, when you look at the Notre Dame Clemson game in 2015, Notre Dame outplayed Clemson in a lot of ways. Big plays. Notre Dame was the big play offense that game. You know, they did a lot of the good things, but here's what happened. Clemson didn't beat themselves. Notre Dame beat themselves. Shanked punt, fumbled a kick return, fumbled a run that set up a touchdown. Chris Brown's fumble inside the 10-yard line. You do all those things, and all of a sudden, two evenly matched teams, one team wins, the other team loses because the other team plays clean. And 9 times out of 10, Clemson's not going to beat themselves, right? Now, they tried to against Syracuse, but other parts of their team picked the offense up. And then the offense responded by, okay, we got this in the second half. You're going to have to beat Clemson. It's very rare that they beat themselves. And so you can't do that if you're giving them cheap points. Cheap points, cheap yards. It goes back to the tackling thing on defense, Ryan. Tackle, tackle, tackle. Don't give them cheap yards. Make them earn it. That's the only chance you have to win this game is make them earn it. We talk about Notre Dame is evenly matched with Clemson, but you're all of a sudden that evenly matched game swings in their favor when you're missing tackles and a 2-yard gain turns into a 20-yard gain, or a -2 turns into a +10. If you're giving them 30-yard fields because of a shanked punt. I mean, look at last week. Notre Dame looks like they had an offensive breakout. Not really. You had three scores came off of defensive special teams.
Yep.
Right. And so, those are the things that you look at and say, because I'm correct on this, right? They had the interception. Obviously, they went back for a touchdown. They had the blocked punt that they recovered at the 2-yard line. And I believe they also got points off of the shank punt as well, correct? Didn't Notre Dame also get a score on a short field that game as well, or on that drive as well? I'm pulling up the box score now.
Sounds correct.
I'm pretty sure of this. Yes, the second half, Notre Dame had a 54-yard drive, a 2-yard drive. Was it the field goal? Was it the field goal in the third quarter where they got a 31-yard field goal? Yes, I believe that was it. That was a short field, I believe. Let me go down here to the third quarter, because you know how this stuff gets in my head, Ryan. It's just going to bother me all day until I think about it. So you see Notre Dame started their second drive of the half at the Syracuse 35-yard line because of a shanked punt. A punt that went 28 yards. Why did they go 20 yards? Because he was worried about not getting it blocked.
Sure was.
Right? Now that's 10 points. That's 17 points you just got off your special teams and defense. If Notre Dame can do that in this game, then you're going to win, right? No, Notre Dame's offense had 0 pass attack last week, like basically, right? 116 yards, 9 of 19, an interception. Yet they won 41-27 at a team like Syracuse. Why? Because you generated 17 points with your defense and special teams. Right now, the opposite is true. If you let Clemson do that, no chance you're going to win this football game. So it's those hidden yards and those hidden plays that are going to have a big impact in this game. Ryan, we're going to have tomorrow, you and I are going to do predictions for this show. So we're not doing predictions today. We'll have one more IB Nation Sports Talk show tonight at 6 o'clock. Obviously, we'll have our countdown to kickoff on Saturday, beginning at 10 a.m., Vince D'Addario and Sean Stiers. And then, of course, we'll have our post game after the game. But we are not done yet here. We're done with the keys to victory portion of the show, but we have our mailbag coming up next. But before we jump to the mailbag, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, check out the merch store, do all that cool stuff. Sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And if you're listening via podcast, I would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. It definitely helps our channel out big time and helps negate some of those reviews that aren't so kind and friendly to us, which you're always going to have, right? So definitely do that for us. We'd greatly, greatly appreciate it. Let's go to mailbags, Ryan. We don't have a lot today, so we should be able to work through these pretty quickly. And let's get to these here real quick, Ryan. We have a question from Nick Lane. He says, I did want to say this before we get to this. We are having a tailgate on Saturday. I haven't decided the time yet. I got to find out when my parents are going to be in town. But we'll probably start sometime between noon and 2. I'm probably leaning kind of closer to 2. but we may get there a little bit earlier. We'll be in the stadium lot. I do have a pass for the stadium lot, so it's right there in front of the stadium. So we will have our tailgate on Saturday. I will take a picture and tweet it out and put it on the message board once I get there to kind of let you know where in the stadium lot we are. So you'll definitely want to check that out. So let's get to the questions. Nick Lane says, who do we need the most to step up in this upcoming game? Ryan, I guarantee you that you and I have the same answer for this. If you could say one player has to be at his best today, some others are going to play well, but like one guy that I'm going to guarantee is going to play well, it's number 10.
I was about to say it's Drew Pine, right? Like it's easy. Yeah. Wait, you can't just say number 10, Brian, because Prince Kali is also number 10, right?
No,
like,
we all know what we're talking about. We all know what we're talking about.
I know.
We all know what we're talking about.
I agree. I agree completely, though. It's one of those things where especially Notre Dame is running the ball at a pretty nice clip. Offensive line's playing pretty well. It's inconsistent in the passing game from a weapons perspective, but it's definitely improving, no doubt about it. And defensively, you've been playing well enough to win every football game this year. So the elephant in the room is that the quarterback position needs to be more and more consistent. If he's able to, and you're able to have a balanced attack against Clemson, then we're cooking with grease, man. Like at that point, you have everything open to you and all options open, which will only help you against this talented of a defense.
I want to bring up a comment from a Clemson fan that's in our chat.
Oh man.
And he said, yeah, we're all rooting for our team, but I like listening to realistic fans of other teams too. And then he gave a comment that I think sums up things that I like fans like this. Somebody asked him about the quarterback thing, and he says, I like DJ. I prefer DJ because it doesn't think Cade Klubnik's ready. DJ's more seasoned. And that's actually like a rational comment, because it's always DJ struggling, put in the freshman. Cade Klubnik's an incredibly talented player, but he's also small and young, and I don't know if he's ready to take the kind of pounding week after week after week. Maybe once you get through this game, but that's actually a very smart comment. Obviously, here's the thing about this from a Clemson standpoint. People have asked me I've actually been asked this by Notre Dame fans. If you were Clemson, would you start Cade this week? I'm like, heck no. I am not giving Cade Klubnik his first start on the road in the weather conditions you expect against that defense. Right. If I got to go to him, I'm going to go to him. But if you go to him, if DJ's struggling, there's less pressure on Cade in that instance, as opposed to the entire week of preparation and answering questions. And I'm the guy and the weight of the world's on my shoulders. I want his game to be, if you have to use him, it's coming off the bench with less pressure. Then you start him down the road. So that's a very, very fair comment, in my opinion. Because again, a lot of fans, it's always like, put the young kid in, especially if the kid's a 5-star. Sometimes that's true. That if a young guy needs to play. In this instance, I don't think DJ has played to the level. It's like this. If DJ was like a 3-star, how's he any different than Ian Book? Right. I mean, look at his numbers. How's DJ any different than what Ian Book was? Steady, just gets the job done. Don't make a ton of mistakes. If you get the occasional chance to use your legs, go do it. The difference is Ian Book was a 3-star that they flipped from Washington State. The expectations were not high. DJ was a top 10 national player. He's expected to be like Trevor Lawrence. But if you take out the expectations, I think DJ's been a solid, decent quarterback this year. Yep. But it's considered bad because of what the expectations were. Now, is he have a kung fu grip on the starting job? No, but he's your starter. So I thought that was a very fair take, and it did create it's an interesting dynamic, right? I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic of how the perception of a guy coming in can have such an impact on how good he is.
It's also pretty refreshing too, Brian, because I mean, like you said, from a fan perspective, what player is more liked on a football team than a backup quarterback, right? Like it's always the next guy's always going to be better, man. Yeah. They're always going to be better.
And they'll turn on that backup quick. I mean, it was like 2 weeks, like a month ago, you got reporters asking Marcus Freeman, do you regret not starting Drew Pine at the beginning of the year? And then like 2 weeks later, this guy shouldn't be on scholarship. He's terrible. They need to play Steve Angeli. It's just the way that it is, because you're no longer the backup anymore. You're now the starter. Somebody else is the new favorite player. So yeah, that's an interesting look at it. So, all right, let's get to some more questions here. We've got one from, let me see here. Brandon K. Do you think that if we execute the game plan on offense and defense, we can win, or will it take more fluky type plays like a block punt or safety and things of that nature? Brandon, we kind of talked about this a little bit early before the show, and this question came in before the show started. So I'm assuming you kind of heard that, but I do want to reiterate, and I think this is a good place to reiterate it. I do not think this is a game that Notre Dame needs to trick their way into winning. I don't think this is a game where Notre Dame needs fluky things to happen. Those things help, but I think Clemson could use that help as well. I do think this game is a lot more evenly matched than people think if the good version of Notre Dame shows up. This is a Jekyll and Hyde team. And if the team that played against Stanford shows up, or the team against Marshall shows up, or Cal, or even UNLV offensively, this is going to be a rough game for Notre Dame. But if the team that played against Ohio State, if the team that played against North Carolina, if the team that played against BYU to a degree, if the team that played against, obviously last week against Syracuse shows up, then this is going to be a dogfight. These are two relatively evenly matched teams talent-wise. The difference is Clemson has been steady all year, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. Notre Dame has been way too up and down. So when Notre Dame plays their game, that's what they do to jump out and get a lead on Ohio State. When they stop doing that, they lose. Same thing is in true a lot of these games. So it's going to be very important that Notre Dame is able to kind of go out there and play their game. You are absolutely right. Now, sometimes playing your game can create those fluky type of plays. I don't think blocking a punt is a fluky play. Notre Dame does not have 5 blocked punts this year because they've had 5 fluky plays. They've blocked 5 punts because they scheme it, they teach it, and they execute it, right? So to me, blocking a punt is executing your game plan. It's you being you. That's who they are. And the fluky play is more of like DJ drops back to pass. Like a fluky play has lost Michigan games, right? Or Notre Dame games. I think of 2011 when Tommy Rees was the quarterback. I think it was, if I remember correctly, I'm gonna have to look this up, Ryan, because I want to make sure that I'm getting the scenario. It's been over a decade now, so I want to make sure that I get this correct. But Notre Dame is playing Michigan. You all remember at one point in time in that game, they had a 24-11 lead. And second half of the game, Notre Dame is up. It was 24-14. Notre Dame is up 24-14. They drive down the field. It's first and goal at the 7-yard line. There is 6 minutes left in the game. 24-14 game. Tommy Rees drops back to throw. He's going to throw a fade to Michael Floyd. Michigan can't stop it. They've never been able to stop Michael Floyd. And he gets here, and he drops the ball. Michigan recovers. They go down and score 24-21. That's a fluky play. Michigan did nothing to make that play happen, right? Yep. I think of the later that year, they're playing USC. USC jumps up to a big lead. Notre Dame's coming back. It's 24-17. Notre Dame has the ball inside the 5-yard line. A muff snap, goes back. USC recovers it, runs it 90 yards for a touchdown. A tie game where Notre Dame takes all the momentum, turns into a 2-touchdown game, ball game. That's a fluky play. I don't think Notre Dame necessarily needs that kind of stuff to happen. What they have to make sure is that they don't have that happen to them, right? Earn your stuff. Make Clemson earn it. Clemson's goal is to make Notre Dame earn it, and the team that can earn it the most is the one that's going to win, right? Or the team that makes the fewest mistakes, because making fewer mistakes means you're executing your game plan. So very, very good question, Brandon. Very good question. Jimmy M says, Shipley shouldn't scare Notre Dame. He's a good physical runner, but he's not Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, Travion Henderson, or Sean Tucker for that matter. I'm going to say 2 things. Number 1, no player should ever scare Notre Dame. Number 2, I think this is an incredible understatement of how good Will Shipley is. Like, Will Shipley's a very good football player and makes plays in a lot of ways. I don't quite know why he gets the disrespect that he does. I think part of it is, Ryan.
Well, you know why.
Well, beyond that, I think part of it is because he did kind of, Notre Dame thought they were going to get him and all that, and then he ended up going to Clemson.
That's
Like,
actually the main reason I was talking about. I wasn't actually hinting at the other thing. It was, I promise. I promise. Well, why is he disrespected by Notre Dame fans? Because Notre Dame fans wanted him to be part of the program.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just.
I think there's another reason he's not respected appropriately, but I think the first one is to me the thing. But look, Will Shipley's a very good football player, very good football player, and he makes a lot of yards. He maximizes yards. He's a weapon in every phase of the game that the ball can be in his hands. He's a special teams weapon. He's a pass game weapon. He's a run game weapon. Is he as good as Najee Harris? I'd argue he's better than Najee Harris. He's at least more productive than Najee Harris was as a sophomore, in my opinion. So I mean, I'm gonna have to kind of push back a little bit on that. And here's the other thing. Let me say something else about Najee Harris. When he was a sophomore, he was a pretty good football player. Najee Harris is running behind a lot better offensive line than Will Shipley's running behind. But let's just compare their numbers as sophomores, right? So as a sophomore at Alabama, Najee Harris had 783 yards rushing, 4 touchdowns, 7 receiving yards, 0 return yards. That's in 15 games. Will Shipley is a sophomore at Clemson. It has 739 rushing yards, 153 receiving yards, 10 rushing touchdowns. He's returned 6 kicks back for 190 yards. So he's already over 1,000 yards of all-purpose yards in 8 games against 4 opponents with winning records, 3 opponents that are currently ranked in the top 25. Is Will Shipley a Travis Etienne? No, but that's still pretty good. He's still a really good football player, and he also doesn't have. Go ahead, Ryan. I think you're going to say. I was
just going to say there's also not many Travis Etiennes that come through, right? Like,
but you know what else? You know what else? That team also had Trevor Lawrence, Justin Ross, T. Higgins, Hunter Renfrow, and a better offensive line. Fact. Yeah. So look, Will Shipley is my priority number 1 to stop in this game. If you shut down Will Shipley, Clemson's going to have a tougher time scoring. Simple as that. Does that mean – look, is he Sean Tucker? I think Sean Tucker's pretty flipping good. And you say, or Sean Tucker for that matter, with all due respect, Sean Tucker's a better football player than a couple guys on that board. You know what I mean? Like, or at least more productive than they were. So I think Will Shipley's a really good football player. And I know a lot of fans don't think that. And I kind of get why.
I also don't like the phrasing of he's a good physical runner. I think Will Shipley's pretty explosive, man. I don't consider him just like he's not just like a one-cut power runner. Like he's got a little something to him.
He's got some juice. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. And D-Rock said it yesterday. Like I said yesterday, Shipley's the X factor. I think that's 100% accurate. 100% accurate. I think if he goes off, they're hard to stop. If you shut him down, they're beatable. They're absolutely beatable. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. Yeah, you shut him down, it's a lot easier to keep them in check. Let's go to the next question here. We've got one from Brandon K. He says, is it more likely that we will see Klubnik or Angeli? I hope that the answer is Klubnik. Yeah. Right? Because if Klubnik plays, that means I don't think either one of these teams blows the other one out. I don't. I think it would I'd be incredibly disappointed if that happened. I don't think either team blows the other one out. Could the one team pull away late? Sure. But I don't think one team blows the other one out. So I don't think it's going to be a backup gets in the game. I think to the point here, so that means if one of these two kids gets in the game, means the starter was hurt or ineffective.
Yes.
I don't want anyone to get hurt. My hope is that if they bring Klubnik in, it's because DJ is playing poorly, which would mean multiple turnovers. With all due respect to Clemson, if you turn the ball over against Notre Dame the way you did against Clemson, you're going to be down more than 21-10. That's just what I feel, So hopefully it's Klubnik because DJ's not playing well, not because he's injured, but because he's not playing well. That would be ideal for Notre Dame.
And you talked about it not being an ideal situation, throwing Klubnik to the Wolves, against Notre Dame and, away from home. it's also not very fair to throw Steve Angeli to the wolves that are the Clemson defensive line. Like, that is not a great situation to be in your first, like, real action. Like, he's been in to hand the football off, but if you're bringing him in, things probably went wrong,
right?
or you're up by a lot.
Because if DJ's, to your point, right, if DJ's not playing well, it's most likely because Notre Dame's rattling him and pressuring him.
Right.
Part of the reason Cade Klubnik isn't ready, like, to me, Cade Klubnik's ready up here. There's not a doubt in my mind. Cade Klubnik showed up to college ready to play. Mentally, it's physically that I don't think he's ready to play. He's a really skinny kid. He's not a real big kid. He's going to need some time. No question about that. Zach Martin with a question. He says from Mailbag, given his weird use this year, if you were Tyree, assuming you get your degree in 3 years, would you consider looking for other opportunities? Yes, I would. I normally don't talk about this, but the way that they've used him this year is just downright embarrassing. And it's getting to the point where it's almost seeming like it's personal, like, to me. Like, it's just it's starting to get to that point in time. For whatever reason, I don't know what it is. It's almost seeming personal, but he's been so incredibly misused. And here's the thing about Chris Tyree. He's got 2 years left.
Yeah.
Because this freshman year was 2020, which means that doesn't count. So he becomes a lot more valuable on the open market if he decides to go that route. And I believe he will have his Notre Dame degree, at least by May. So I would. I absolutely would. No question.
Would I consider it? For sure. I mean, you use the word consider, right, Zach? So, like, would I consider it? Yeah, absolutely. No doubt.
Yeah, I'd strongly consider it. If things don't change, strongly consider it. Market Weiss with the question here. I honestly don't think Pine is capable of being the guy we lean on to win a big game like this. If he can just be solid and if everyone else around him plays their best, I think we have a legit shot. I don't think either quarterback of either team is a guy that you want to lean on to win a game like this.
I agree.
It's about do your job, right?
Yep.
And I don't think Pine is capable of being the guy to lean on. I guess that depends on what you're leaning on him to do. If it's, hey, man, we need you to go out there and be a playmaker and run for 70 yards and throw for 350 and run around and do some of the things that Trevor did against us and do some things that Deshaun Watson did and do some of the things that, these other great no, he's not. And he'll never be that good. Neither's DJ. Right. But if as far as being capable of being the guy to lean on, I'm leaning on Drew Pine in this game in certain ways. I want to take some shots. Get the ball out, run the offense. That's leaning on him. It's just, I guess it would depend on how you define it. Am I asking him to leaning on him as far as we're building the offense around your talents? No. But I need you to, what did we call Drew Pine this summer, right? Or was it was last summer. I wrote an article that ironically went viral in the Wisconsin game. Right. Not a lot of people read it over the summer, but when he came in against Wisconsin, I looked at our thing and all of a sudden there's like 1,000 people on our site, which is concurrence, which is huge. And it's like they're all reading the Drew Pine story that I wrote in July. But the thing that I said about it is Drew Pine is the ultimate point guard quarterback, right? He is, and I mean, like there's three types of point guards really, right? There's the Magic Johnson flash, kind of guy. There's the Derrick Rose, Allen Iverson type, which is just score volume, right? Which is to me sort of like a Lamar Jackson, right? And then there's John Stockton. And Drew Pine needs to be John Stockton. It's not flashy. He's not an elite physical talent. He wins with this, and he wins because he's a tremendous decision maker, right? And that's what you want to lean on Drew Pine to be. That's who he has to be in this game, is that kind of point guard. Get the ball where it needs to go correctly, accurately, and on time. That doesn't mean you got to fit the ball between three dudes and be John Elway and do all that. Just, dude, hit your drop, make your read, get the ball out on time to the right guys. That's it. It sounds simple. Against this defense, it's not as easy as it sounds. There's no doubt. Caleb Collins says, Ryan, bold prediction. Notre Dame has 2 50-yard touchdown runs. What's your bold prediction? I mean, that's a pretty bold prediction for a team that has yet to have a 50-yard touchdown run on the season, but it'd be nice.
It's a very bold prediction. I mean, I guess if we're going for long touchdowns, Brian, 60-yard touchdown pass, 60-plus yarder. Notre Dame's missed on a couple of them this year. If they can grab one, it would be a big play, obviously. So I'm going to say a long touchdown pass and a couple turnovers would be my bold, I guess. But it's not as bold as Caleb's because that would be very bold with how Notre Dame has kind of been operating offensively this year.
I mean, a bold prediction for me would be Drew Pine throws for 300 yards. That's a bold prediction. Right?
It's bold?
Yeah. Because I don't think they necessarily need him to do that, in my opinion.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Trader Z, is this the make or break game for Tommy Rees's OC? I'm going to say yes, to a degree. I think this can be the game that breaks him. I think that if he has a great game, it definitely takes a lot of the pressure off, but it doesn't make him. There's been too much bad for one game to completely erase, but it's a big first step. Big first step. His true make or break, meaning he can also make it, is going to come also. Step 1 is here. Step 2 is the Saturday after Thanksgiving in California against the Trojans of Southern Cal. That's the true make or break. This game could break him though. If Notre Dame just is completely incompetent on offense against Clemson, just running duo all game, can't get anything going, can't move the ball, score 10 points,
3 and outs all over the place.
Yeah, 3 and outs constantly. Yeah. Drew Pine just throwing it to Michael Mayer every time. I mean, that's like, okay, he ain't that guy. He ain't that guy. But all the criticism he's getting gets real quiet if Tommy comes and out-coaches Wes Goodwin. Gets real quiet. Real quiet. Does it mean he's completely arrived? No. But it silences people a lot and gives him that final chance in 3 weeks to finally kind of say, okay, I got this. Just like Marcus Freeman needed time to learn to be a head coach, it would mean that Tommy just needed some time to learn to be an OC that's got it all on his shoulders. He didn't have that offensive head coach this year to kind of steer him in the right direction like he had with Brian Kelly, apparently. Right? So that's what that would mean. So yes. I think, but it doesn't completely eliminate it all. Because if he goes out and lays an egg against USC, doesn't matter. It has to be the next two. The next two. Got another question from Spark5219, Brian and Ryan. I see that Shipley is averaging about 135 all-purpose yards per game. It's pretty good. Defensively, we shut down Shipley. Do we shut down Clemson's offense? What's your thoughts?
I think that if you limit – shutdown's a little harsh, right? If you limit the running game and you make it just kind of a less than – you make it kind of an underwhelming unit during the day, then Brian, I think that you do to a degree. I mean, the last time you saw DJ Uiagalelei, he did have a great game against Notre Dame. Obviously, he threw for 4 bills against Notre Dame, right? So it's not like it's over, but I think that the success that Clemson has offensively this year is built off of running the football. Like we've talked about the screen game, we talked about the RPO game, the play action game. It's hard for me to imagine in this particular matchup that if Notre Dame shuts down or seriously limits the running game, that the offense for Clemson will be that potent, right? Like, I don't think that it will be a very great unit. So I partly agree, Spark. I think that if you limit this running game and shut it down potentially, everything's built off of the running game for Clemson. So I think that they would have a tough sledding if they're not able to run the ball.
The only way it would matter is if your secondary just lays an egg.
Exactly.
Just blown coverages that are going for 60-yard touchdowns. If the rest of your defense just kind of does their job and you shut down Will Shipley, Clemson will have a hard time scoring. There's always exceptions when you did well here, but you stunk over there. I mean, those are always exceptions. Shane Phillips says, I have a question because I have not watched Clemson one time this season. Does Clemson have a different scheme under their new defensive coordinator this year? Sort of.
I wouldn't say different scheme. I would say different emphasis, right? Like it's still a 4-2-5 base.
It's a little bit of both, I would say, Ryan.
Okay.
I do think that you're seeing different types of pressures. Coverage structure is a little bit different. But I think overall, your point of it's a different emphasis is what makes it look way more different than it actually is. And that's what you were going to say. So explain what you mean by that. Because I do think there's some schematic differences, but The usage is the big thing.
So, I mean, if you watch what Brent Venables did at Clemson, he was incredibly aggressive with his second level pressures. He would just disguise things. He would slant guys one way, bring them in opposite gaps. He would bring multiple second level defenders. Like, he was incredibly aggressive blitzer. Like, that was one thing about Brent and I liked watching Brent's defense because even though he was very aggressive, sometimes when guys are overly aggressive with their blitzes and their movement up front, you can be a little gap unsound. Like, I think about Alex Grinch and how he kind of employs his defense, right? But I thought for most part that Venables did a good job of remaining gap sound while also being aggressive. This defense I've seen for Wes Goodwin, and again, it's only about 3 or 4 games that I've watched this year from like the coach's film, but it seems way less aggressive than it has in the past. They're not bringing as many exotic pressures. They're not bringing things from different spots as much. So I think fundamentally the biggest difference for me, Brian, is Brent Venables was a whole lot more aggressive than what I have seen from Wes Goodwin. I think that they are just polar opposites with how they like to bring pressure right now.
And for me, Ryan, to me, that is a scheme difference. And that's what I'm referring to, right? It's a little bit more than an emphasis different, but structurally, there's a lot of similarities. Same alignment, 4-2-5. They're using Barrett Carter similarly to how they use Isaiah Simmons to a degree. There's times was it 2018 or 2019? We would literally line Isaiah Simmons up as the free safety.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not seeing that from this kid, but there's a lot of similarities. Let's go to the next one. Beefeater, Brian and Ryan. How does Phil Mafah compare to Audric Estime? Similar size.
Similar size. Yeah, Mafah's listed at like 6 foot, 230 pounds or so, somewhere in that ballpark. I mean, I would say this, Toe Jam, like they're both they both win in similar ways, right? Like they're both downhill runners. They want to convert to their speed to their power and their momentum getting downhill. Like they're that type of player. I do think that Audric has better foot quickness than Phil Mafah. Like I've seen Audric kind of make people miss in tight spaces a little bit more than Mafah, but I mean, Mafah's a hammer, man. If he gets downhill, he's got a lot of power. He's got a lot of explosiveness. So that's similar in ways, but I think that there is a little difference just as far as foot quickness from Audric, in my opinion.
Let's go to the next question. We have one from We Are Not Marshall, says Brian and Ryan. Notre Dame does a great job of eliminating or limiting the first option running back, Henderson at Ohio State. Why does Notre Dame struggle against the number 2 back? Clemson's number 2 is better than Shipley, in my opinion. Wow. Okay. I was kind of wow. Okay.
So
again, this is
better than Will Shipley.
This is just Will Shipley slander, and that's all this is. Phil Mafah is averaging 4.5 yards a carry. Will Shipley's averaging 6 yards a carry. I mean, come on now. Look, guys,
on a higher volume too.
be better than this, right? There's not. It's not even close. It's not even close how good they are. It's not even close. Is Notre Dame eliminating the number 2 back? I think that only happened really against Ohio State. And if you look at how the season has played out, Mayan Williams is no longer their number 2 back. When he's healthy, he's been their number 1 back most of the year. So, and Mayan Williams is a much better player than Phil Mafah right now. I mean, I'm still a little shocked by that comment. So, I don't know what number 2 back you're referring to. Now, look, they're like, some people said, well, Casey Filkins at Stanford, they didn't even rush for 100 yards, right? Like they weren't as terrible as they are in other games, but they didn't rush for 100 yards. I mean, you gave up 16 points. The number 2 back for Marshall didn't hurt you. The number 1 back did. The number 2 back at UNLV. But again, he wasn't the number 2 in that game. He started that game, right? So the number 1 back didn't play until the second half for some reason. So I guess the UNLV game and Ohio State, I guess, are the 2 examples of that. Like, I guess I don't quite understand that. But yeah, I'm rattled by that Clemson's number 2 is better than Shipley comment. Like, We Are Not Marshall. I love you, man. Maybe we're glad you're safe and sound in New York, but my man, I love you, buddy. That's a bad take.
Brian, if Kobe Pace wasn't hurt, Phil Maffa wouldn't even be their number 2 back. Just want to put that out in the universe as well.
That's true. Yeah, that's definitely a we're upset that he didn't sign with Notre Dame take, in my opinion.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move on from that one. David Kish, could Chris Tyree succeed as a slot receiver? In some areas, he's not a wide receiver. He's not. He's a slasher running back that can also make plays as a receiver. Look, we got a question down here. Somebody or comment somebody made about Mayan Williams and TreVeyon Henderson. It says, honestly, Mayan Williams isn't better than Henderson either. Henderson has been banged up on and off through the year, which gave Mayan more opportunities. Mayan is good, but that's still not true. No, you're inaccurate here. I've watched the games. Very early in the year, Mayan Williams became Ohio State's number 1 runner even before TreVeyon Henderson got hurt. The problem for me is at Ohio State, they have decided their run game is going to be power-oriented. Yeah. And Mayan Williams fits that better. And instead of adjusting to what TreVeyon is, which is a one-cut guy, one-cut-and-go guy, outside zone, buck sweeps, inside zone, cutbacks, things that he was really good at last year, they have decided with the new O-line coach and things like that, that their run game is going to be geared more towards this. They haven't done as good of a job of using both of their skill sets like they did in 2020 with Trey Sermon and Master Teague, where they would adjust a little bit based on who was in the game. And so I think that's been the issue for TreVeyon Henderson just as much as the injuries. Now, he has been banged up this year, but I think it's more about that this is who they want to be in the run game, and Mayan fits that better. And I think that's the reason for it. And now, look, yeah, sophomore slump and all that, but I just don't think TreVeyon's being used effectively either. So I think that factors into my thoughts on why Mayan has had more success this year as well. But to Chris Tyree being a slot receiver, he is a running back that needs to be used appropriately, and he needs to find a school that will use him appropriately. Somebody asked this question too, Beefeater, which ties into it, says, Brian and Ryan, should we be using Tyree the way Clemson uses Shipley? Yeah.
To a degree,
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, outside zone, counters, inside zone, running him out of the backfield. Shipley has a little bit more balance than Tyree. Tyree has more explosiveness, but overall, Shipley would fit, or Tyree would fit in much better at Clemson doing what they're doing than he is with at Notre Dame with what they're trying to do. Notre Dame is doing a very poor job of properly using Chris Tyree's skills. But to the question that David asked, I don't think he's a full-time receiver. I don't. No. There are some things I would do with him lined up outside as a running back, definitely. But it's not a full-time move that I would make, to be honest with you.
100%.
Leighton Burkholder asks, question, did Tommy Rees show you enough against Syracuse to be confident that he will have a decent game plan against Clemson? I didn't think Tommy Rees had a necessarily great game plan. I mean, my comment after the game was, Ryan, and I know you were listening, but I don't know if you caught this, was it's not that he had a great game plan. It's that it was just not as bad as the previous ones.
That's fair.
I mean,
that's fair.
Right? I mean, there was some decent stuff. It's like he gets credit now for calling a pass or two that gets a guy open. Other teams do that all the time.
Yeah.
You just ran duo all freaking game. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a ton of credit for that. Your dudes were just way better than their dudes. So no, it didn't give me confidence that he'll have a decent game plan against Clemson. But I hope he does. I hope he does. I thought there were some things I liked about the game. Yeah. Ryan and I, you talked about this during the game. When we talked about
especially
the way that they mixed up their persl, their alignments. I loved that. I want to see more of that. Find a little, build on that this week. Definitely. So I mean, it wasn't a bad game plan by any stretch. It was just okay, I got better players than them. Don't get too cute. Let's just go out there and play around our strengths and wear this team out because they're inferior to us. Clemson's not inferior to you. They're your equal at very least. They're your equal. So you got to do some stuff this week to scheme up that you didn't necessarily have to. You didn't have to get too cute last week. And in fact, I probably would have criticized him if he did get too cute. Like, what are you running a reverse for? Like, you don't need that, right? Like, why'd you just call 3 pass plays in a row? Where other games I'm totally fine with calling people. But last week you just didn't need that. This week you're going to need a little bit more creativity. Irish AJ, He says, would you rather have a close loss to Clemson and beat USC or beat Clemson and lose to USC? I am not going to answer that one because I don't neither. I'd rather win both.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I always want to beat USC. That's the closest thing that I'm going to come to answering that question. But honestly, the problem with that is you lose this game. By the time you get to USC, your season's reputation is,
It's over.
a little,
Yep.
So both, man.
Definitely want to beat Clemson, though. Definitely. There's no doubt.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be. I don't want to even think about losing. I'm taking both of them, man. All right. Spark 5219. Ryan, with all these great recruits coming in this weekend for the Clemson game, is Clemson allowed to recruit them, like meet with them, have them over to talk with them, things along that line?
No, I mean this is a Notre Dame recruiting event, right? So those kids are going to be with the coaches, they're going to be with the other recruits, they're going to be on the Notre Dame sideline. Like this is a thing that this is a event that is for Notre Dame, right? Like you're not going to see Dabo walking over to Jaden Greathouse and start talking to him type of thing this weekend, right? Like that's not going to be a thing, right? This is a massive weekend for Notre Dame. Like I said, they have 60 plus recruits that are scheduled to be on campus from the 2023, 2024, 2025, and 2026 classes. Yeah, I think you have 22 players that are committed to Notre Dame in either the 2023 class or 2024 that'll be on campus. So it's a massive opportunity for Notre Dame this weekend on the recruiting end, man. They have a lot to play for, not only on the field, Brian, but they got some heads to turn as well and impress some folks on the sideline as well.
Yep. No doubt. Let's get to the next question here. We've got, I think the only communication, I believe, I could be wrong on this, I believe the only communication you're allowed to have is like a visit to a school visit when you're not allowed to see kids. If you walk by a kid, you're allowed to say hi and keep on going. I believe that's the only communication that an opposing team can have. We got one here from D-Rock Irish. He says, earlier Clemson podcast show stated this is a playoff elimination game for Clemson. Podcaster thinks Clemson won't be in the playoffs with even one loss this year. I mean,
what the SEC looks like right now, it's possible, I guess.
It's possible. To me, Ryan, it's one of those things where you always look at it and say, it just depends on what they do, right? It depends on how they're used. It depends on, I mean, not how they're used, but like how other teams go. It depends on, will this team kind of come out and drop a game? Like if Oregon loses and Notre Dame beats USC, odds are pretty good the Pac-12's out, right? Like, if Clemson loses a barn burner to Notre Dame and then runs the table, they're probably still ranked ahead of UCLA. And in that scenario, they'd get in over a Pac-12 team if that's what it came down to. The Big Ten. Here's the problem that Clemson would have, and here's where it gets a little hairy. Their non-conference this year was pretty soft outside of Notre Dame, and a couple teams you thought were going to be pretty good aren't good down the stretch. Miami's not good. So if they lose to Notre Dame, you're still in the top 7 to 8 most likely. But you're going to need a lot of help because you just don't have, like in the past, like when Clemson lost to Pitt in 2016. The thing that helped them that year is they had a really good non-conference win that year at Auburn. Now, Auburn wasn't great that year. Auburn finished the regular season 8-4, but the perception was you went on the road and beat a pretty good ranked SEC team. And then you look at other years where, 2017 – Clemson loses. Clemson loses to Pittsburgh. But what helped them that year? Obviously they had some good wins over teams in your conference, but then they also beat an Auburn team that went and played for the conference championship that year and beat Georgia in the regular season. So you had that non-conference to build around to overcome that ACC loss. The problem here would be that your only loss, the wins that you would have to kind of spark you to being in with a loss are in conference games against teams that at best are going to be 15 to 25. right? So and the committee already showed they don't respect the ACC. I mean, the committee made that very clear this weekend, and I think that's an inaccurate take. I think the ACC is a lot better, and I talked about this in Mark Rogers' show last night after our show. The ACC is being punished for what they've been in the past. If you go look at what the ACC has done this year out of conference, they are probably in the top 2 as far as best out of conference wins. And I'd probably say Pac-12 is probably number 2 or number 1 or 2 as well. What's the big win the SEC's hanging their hat on? Alabama going on the road and beating Texas by a point with their starting quarterback out for over half the game. Is that, Georgia, Oregon, that's a good one. But outside of that, what do they got? Right? So I think the ACC is being unfairly punished, but that's just the reality of this. There's nothing the ACC can do in conference to change that opinion. It would require them to beat a Notre Dame, and then, they're better off beating Notre Dame than they would have been, losing to NC State than they would be vice versa, just because of the perception of the ACC. So I think it would be a lot harder for Clemson this year to get in with a loss because of the fact that most likely you're going to have 2 really good Big Ten teams with only 1 loss. Most likely you're going to have probably 2 SEC teams with 1-0 losses, which is going to make it tougher. There's still a couple Big 12 teams with a chance to be there, right? Or is it just one? Isn't Oklahoma is TCU the only Big 12 team left with only 1 loss?
TCU doesn't have a loss yet.
No, so with 1 loss, meaning like 1 or fewer losses. Does everybody else in that conference have at least 2 losses in the Big 12?
I believe so.
Yes. So Big 12, basically if you're Clemson, here's what you're rooting for. You're rooting for the SEC to beat each other up. So basically you're looking for Tennessee to beat Georgia, basically, right, to knock Georgia out of the SEC championship game, because that would be the head-to-head you'd have over Georgia. If Georgia loses to Tennessee, Georgia's got that win over Auburn, and then that's really – or Oregon, and that's really it. They don't have a conference championship. Clemson would. Then Clemson would also have a chance to beat a really good ranked team down the stretch in North Carolina. So you need TCU to lose. You need Tennessee to beat Georgia, and then you need to be a huge Tennessee fan, because Tennessee can clean up the possibility of a second SEC team getting in over Clemson if Tennessee handles business by beating Alabama. The worst case scenario for them is one of 2 things. Tennessee beats Georgia and then loses to Alabama in the SEC title game, because then both get in, most likely. Or Georgia beats Tennessee and then Bama beats Georgia in the SEC title game, because then the same thing happens. So you need Tennessee to run the table, knock Alabama out, because that'd be the second loss, and then hope that the remainder of Georgia's schedule isn't overly impressive. That's what you got to hope for. And you've got to hope that TCU loses a game, because if Georgia loses this week, Ryan, the rest of their schedule's at Mississippi State, at Kentucky, home against Georgia Tech. There's no sexy wins in there that are going to get them, that are going to boost them up. And then Clemson would also need to root for Carolina to run the table. They need Carolina to run the table, be a borderline top 10 team, and beat them in the ACC title game. That's what they would need if they lose to Notre Dame. Absolutely. Because then you'd have we lost to Notre Dame, but then we beat Carolina, who lost to Notre Dame, and then that would boost their resume up. And then they would need Notre Dame to beat USC. They would need Notre Dame to smack USC. Because then it's like, hey, dude, that's not the same Notre Dame team that played Marshall and Stanford. You know what I mean? But the point is that's a lot of ifs, Ryan. And that's why Clemson needs to win this game. If we're looking at it from a Clemson standpoint, that's why they need to win this game. Because, it's the kind of game that you look at and say, boy, they're going to need some help. And you don't want to be in a position where you're going to need that kind of help. And so that's going to be the key. That's going to be the key to this. We have another question from Corey Ruth. Corey says, I noticed most are defining Drew Pine more by his last 3 games than by his first 3 games. Very true. Do you believe that Drew Pine is capable of bouncing back to the 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, 70% in this game, 70+% in this game? Ryan, I'll let you take first crack at it.
I was going to say, is he capable? Sure. I mean, I think that it's never as bad as you think. It's never as good as you think, right? Like, we have seen evidence to say that Drew Pine, when he plays within himself and he is confident in what he does, He can be a efficient and successful quarterback at this level. Like, there's no doubt about that. Now, what have you done for me lately, right? The recency bias type of thing for this is that he has not been good in the last 3 games. But, I mean, to the question, Corey, can he get back to those numbers? Yeah, he can. I think more than anything, though, you need to find that even split here, right? Like, he can't be as bad as he's been the last 3 games, but you also can't expect him to ball out like he did against North Carolina in this football game. There's got to be something in between. Consistency is what's really lacking with Drew Pine right now. But, I mean, get to the question, Brian. Yeah, it could happen. Like, it's possible, for sure. It's possible.
Yeah. Somebody reminded me of a good win that the SEC has, and I always forget about this one. Florida beating Utah is a very good win. And it's what makes it even better is it's a middle-of-the-road SEC team beating a really good Pac-12 team. I always forget about that game for some reason. So, yes, the SEC does have 2 good non-conference wins. I'll give them that for sure. But there's not a lot else outside of that, to be honest with you. And the point is that the ACC is not getting enough credit. But I always forget about this because I forgot about that yesterday. And I don't know why, because I picked Florida to win that game too. So I don't know why I gotta keep forgetting that one. So Ryan, I know you got to run. I'm gonna get these last couple questions, and then we'll get rocking and rolling here because we do have a couple more. We do have a couple more questions that I do want to get to, but we do got to run here pretty soon. Let's get to and then my answer to you, Corey, is that I do think he's capable of at least being the 200+ yard guy. I don't think he's got to be at 70. If Drew can be around 65, 220 to 250, 2 touchdowns, and as long as there's no turnovers with that, that's going to be a really good performance, in my opinion. That's definitely a performance that gives Notre Dame a chance to win that game. There's no question about that. And to your point, I think it changes the narrative because the dynamic nature of this win would be such because of how good Clemson is and how highly ranked they are that I think it would go a long way towards silencing some of the criticism of the last 3 games because a lot of people said, well, he's not capable of doing this. Whereas I just don't think he's playing well. I think he's capable of it. I just don't think he's playing well. And if he plays well against Clemson and helps lead Notre Dame to a win over Clemson, and then let's say he plays bad against Navy, it's more of a he played bad. It's not that he can't do it. It's that he's just not playing well. And it's a lot easier to get a guy who has the ability to play better than it is to get a guy that doesn't have the ability to play well. And so it would answer a lot of those questions. Cole Barker asks, are we going to see a lot of screens this game? I think Clemson plays a ton of drop 8 until we give them reason not to. I don't know why Clemson would play drop 8. I have no clue why they would play drop 8, except on 3rd down. I mean, that would be the only one. But I 1st and 2nd down, I don't see any reason Clemson's going to be doing drop 8. I don't know. They're going to be coming downhill. But as far as what Notre Dame needs to do in the pass game, I mean, it's not screens. I watched Florida State try to run a lot of running back screens against Clemson, and I watched Clemson's linebackers and safeties just fly to the ball. They can really run at linebacker, and their safeties are pretty good against the screens. So I don't know if I just don't know if that's the way that I would go. I think for me, I want to see a lot of running back touches. There are some chances there for a screen if you can catch them. If you have a down and distance where you're pretty confident that they're going to be in a pressure, and you can run a screen behind that, tunnel screen, slip screen, Y screen, something like that. I'd run one to maybe Holden Stace instead of Michael Mayer, just to a little bit more opportunity for deception. I think there's some stuff like that. But to me, Cole, what I'd rather see is just a quick game. Take the 5-yard hit. Like RPOs to me are an extension of your run game. So if you're pulling and throwing and completing a 5-yard pass on an RPO, that's a win. That's a win for me. And I would take those. I think I would rather see more of that stuff than the other stuff, in my opinion. Jason Rose says, hey, guys, who is more likely to come back next season between Brandon Joseph and Cam Hart? I wish that Ryan would have been able to answer that one. I'd be curious to get his take because he talks to scouts and people like that. I would probably say Brandon Joseph because the concern with Cam Hart, if I'm in his shoes, unless I'm being flat out told, dude, you may not get drafted, which Brian had some interesting feedback from NFL people about that on the message board that he needs to play better to be on the board. But let's say he plays well down the stretch. He's got injury history that you've got to say, man, do you really want to risk coming back and getting hurt again? Where Brandon doesn't really have that. So I would say Brandon Joseph, maybe for that reason, would be an interesting one. Brandon Pietz asks, what do you guys feel is the reason for Lorenzo Styles not being over the impactful guy we all expected him to be? I think there's several reasons for that. I think number one, I just don't think his head is right has been there this year to me. I think he has looked not confident from the beginning of the year. Even the Ohio State game, there were times he just wasn't confident. He wasn't playing hard all the time. He was kind of, if he wasn't getting the ball, he was kind of jogging. He wasn't blocking. He wasn't giving effort. And then he started getting drops. I think he was frustrated by the lack of usage. I think that was part of it. I just think there's been some football maturity issues, like, not personal maturity issues. I've heard Lorenzo's a pretty mature kid, but just football maturity issues where you allow things that aren't going your way to kind of manifest and then build, and then he gets a couple drops and he starts putting himself on that, and he's not getting the ball a lot and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's played a big role in a lot of it. And so hopefully that changes. I do think getting him going in this game would be very helpful. I don't think you have to do it to win, but I think it would make winning a lot easier, in my opinion. And then last one here from Thomas Wilkins. Why can't Notre Dame wear their gold jerseys for the first time? Why can't we have green pom-poms like Tennessee? I imagine if you wanted to have green pom-poms, you could bring them. I don't know if Notre Dame is going to spend the money on something like that. They don't like to spend money on you. They like to spend money on themselves. That's just the reality of it, in my opinion. And so, I look at it and say, gold jerseys I'm against. I think that'd be ugly. I don't think there's any way you can get a gold jersey and match your helmet. I'm hard pass. The cool like alternate uniform I would like to see, and I think people are going to disagree with me on this. I would love to see one of two things: gold helmet, green shirt, and white pants, or gold helmet, blue shirt, and white pants. I think that would be really sharp. I think that'd be a really cool kind of, alternate uniform at home that I think would be really sharp, really sharp. There's no doubt. Either one of those would be cool for me. So that's what I would go with. So that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Obviously, tonight, 6 o'clock, we will have the IB Nation Sports Talk Show, final show of the week. It'll be Sean and Jesse tonight. Definitely check that out. Tomorrow, we will have at 1 o'clock, we'll have our prediction show. We'll talk about Notre Dame. We'll talk about Notre Dame, Clemson, obviously. Then we'll talk about Alabama, LSU. We'll preview that game and give predictions. We'll talk about Tennessee, Georgia a lot. Make our predictions for there. I think some of you might be a little surprised by my prediction for that game. We'll see. I might be teasing that a little bit. I don't know what the rest of the staff is going to predict, but I've had a pretty good year so far predicting straight up. I think I looked at the other day. I'm 36-6. I'm first place on the staff right now. 36-6, and about 4, 5, 6 games up on everybody else. So I'm hoping that I have another good week. We'll see. But I'm going to have that prediction for tomorrow. We'll have Wake Forest, NC State as another game that we will preview tomorrow. I'm trying to think of some of the other big games that Ryan and I talked about us discussing tomorrow. There's another top 25 game that we'll discuss tomorrow. I'm trying to remember who it was. Texas and Kansas State is another game that we'll talk about tomorrow. We'll dive into that one as well. I'm very curious to see how that game goes. And then there's a few other games that I'm very intrigued by this weekend that will be somewhat entertaining. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about some of the teams that Notre Dame has played. We'll talk a little bit about North Carolina and Virginia. And I'm very intrigued by the game tomorrow night, the Friday night game in the Pac-12, Oregon State and Washington. I think this is an opportunity for Washington, if they can beat Oregon State, who's now 23rd, that Washington then jumps up to 7-2, and then they would jump into the top 25 and knock Oregon State out. So that's one thing I would do. And then, Cole, I see what you meant third down. I think third down, I agree with you. I would do drop 8. The other thing, too, is they also have some pass rushers that are good enough to kind of win in those situations. But, yes, I agree with that. But I still think even drop 8, there's shots and plays to be made there. But the key is avoid the third down and longs that will put them in those situations. Because if Notre Dame's in 3rd and 4, they're in run. You got to be worried about them running on you. So I think those are the keys. Is that means being good at winning on 1st and 2nd down. But anyway, that's what we'll discuss tomorrow. And then, of course, Saturday we'll have our IB Nation countdown to kickoff at 10 a.m. till noon. We'll have a tailgate Saturday in the stadium lot. I will tweet out and put on the message board exactly where we will be that day. We'll get there sometime between noon and 2. I'll tweet out when we're kind of on the way, just so people can have a heads up. But I look forward to seeing all of you that are going to be at the game there. There's no cost. There's no payment. You don't have to be a subscriber to the message board. Anybody that's a part of the IB community is welcome. Bring your spouses, friends, family, whatever, to the tailgate. It'll be a really good time. I'm looking forward to seeing as many people as possible. So have a great rest of your day, everybody, and we will talk to you very soon. Thank you so much for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.